Within Cataclysm, we were told that we would get the Abyssal Maw as a raid during the first patch. What is the Abyssal Maw? Well, during the questing experience of one of the first zones of the expansion, Vashj'ir has you eventually wander to a whirlpool leading to the Abyssal Maw, a portal to the elemental plane of water. And there, we fight various creatures of the Old God and even try to assist the elemental lord of water himself, Neptulon. But at the end of the fight, we fail, and he's dragged away by a massive kraken. This was supposed to lead into the raid, which originally was even supposed to deal with N'Zoth in some way. But the raid was even partially done, and can be found in the files. But after feedback during the beta of how players absolutely hated the underwater combat of the zone, even one underwater boss could be seen as too much for the raid. And while they did like that they could reuse a lot of assets for the raid, making it extremely easy to make, so they eventually just put all the work into the Firelands, putting all the boss numbers that they were going to work on in the Abyssal Maw into the Firelands. And then they just cut out the Abyssal Maw itself. And because it was cut, we didn't actually get to know what happened to him until Legion, when he shows up and we find out that he just kind of escaped himself off screen. Although short, something to mention, Firelands was intended to launch at the start of the expansion, with Skywall, Bastion of Twilight, originally called Grim Batol, which may imply that the dungeon was supposed to be a raid, or the raid itself was supposed to take place there, instead of wherever the portal at the top of the spire teleports you, and Blackwing Descent as shown at the BlizzCon announcement. Deathwing was given a humanoid model that he was supposed to show up in, however, we only ever see this model in-game once, which is with a bunch of drunkards telling stories about their encounters with Deathwing, with one of them telling a story about how they punched Deathwing in the face. Funny enough, as they tell you about his humanoid form, which is seen nowhere else in-game, this could almost act as evidence in his favor that he did in fact punch Deathwing in the face. We did get to see him originally in this form in the Twilight Highlands quest where you and Alexstrasza fought against him, as making him humanoid allowed you a chance to actually fight him. However, when they brought the game to live, they fought in dragon forms, while you were forced to fight a random chromatic dragon instead. Path of the Titans was a system that would add a path around the glyph system we had at the time. This system, funny enough, was going to be the first expansion long progression system, something that's kind of become a norm in WoW ever since Legion. Players would need to first find these special glyphs by doing archaeology, and doing questlines for cults that worship their respective titan, power locked behind locking yourself into a specific covenant. Sounds kind of familiar to something we have today. This progression system gave players a choice of a path, each to do with a titan. These paths would unlock by doing things like questing, raiding, PvP, and even professions, maxing out each week. Then with these special glyph slots, players could insert glyphs of increased ranks, 1 to 10, each rank having 2 to 3 choices at first, with the devs saying it would increase your player's power by about 20% over the entire expansion, which these days seems rather small for an entire expansion system. Although it becomes extremely understandable when you see actually some of the abilities in one of the paths they showed us, Golganeth. For rank 1, we have Earth's Embrace, which reduces physical damage taken by 4%, and Battle Harden, reducing durations of bleeds and stuns by 20%. Rank 2, we have Medic, giving your bandages 30% extra healing, Fortification, a 5-minute buff which reduces nearby allies' damage taken by 10% for 6 seconds, and Rank 3, Breakthrough, 5-minute cooldown to increase your damage by 10% for 10 seconds, only usable after you deal a crit. The system was scrapped pretty early on, as that was all we were shown before it just vanished. And with their vanishment, the Path of the Titan system was simply replaced with just the Prime Glyph system, which just acted as second major glyphs, but even stronger. Although most of them were just major glyphs moved up, with new major glyphs created in order to take their place. Something to note, this system sounds almost exactly like the Covenants of Shadowlands. However, the only different thing is there being no cosmetics. But locking yourself to a specific group that affects your power by up to 20%, while also locking it behind quest content that seemingly takes some time, it almost seems like the Path of the Titans might have later been reworked into what we see today in Covenants. Originally, the War of the Ancients dungeon was supposed to be a raid, although what we know of it is extremely minor. But with how much lore significance the War of the Ancients has, and how much effort they obviously put into the dungeon, it's easy to see why they were trying to turn this into a raid. Gilneas, as originally shown, was supposed to be a full-on battleground within the city itself, acting almost as a full-on city siege between two factions, maybe even being an epic battleground, as it was still supposed to be a capture point battleground, but within the whole city, and with a city of that size, it would have to require lots of people within it. But what we ended up getting instead was Arathi Basin 2 Electric Boogaloo with 2 less bases. During Cataclysm, a player made a request about Warlock pets, asking for the possibility of an incubi. For those of you who don't know, the Sayad is a race of demons found within the Burning Legion. The ones we see of them are all females, the succubi, but there is a theoretical male version called the incubi. However, with little references to them, there's no models or official artwork made for them outside of some possible concept art. Players have wished to see these demons for a long time, and after so much request, one of the community managers responded to the ever-growing thread saying that Blizzard had plans to soon offer a choice between male and female versions of all Warlock demons. Although with no time frame given, and it being over 10 years later, I'm pretty sure they scrapped the idea. Speaking of Battlegrounds, there was originally supposed to be 3 with Cataclysm. However, the third one never came out, where you would push carts in a mining-based battleground within Stranglethorn Jungle, a diamond mine. Planned seemingly even since vanilla, it was a key point marked on the early location map in the Warcraft diary. You would think this place never came out, but it did. Silver Shard Mines, one of the 2 battlegrounds that released in Pandaria, was originally going to be released in Cataclysm, shown as a Cataclysm battleground where it worked pretty much the same as it does now, except a slightly different shape, and with the rocks that could be attacked to block paths for a bit. And it makes so much sense too. The entire mine looks nothing like Pandaria, especially with the mass amount of goblin architecture, rocks that look straight out of Deepholm, and of course the literal troll ruins that were just copy-pasted models from Stranglethorn. Whatever happened to this place that made it get delayed for an entire 2 years, it likely had to do with those rocks, as creating collision where players are nearby can be difficult to get to work right. Deepholm lore-wise is where Deathwing was held, with its portal being within the Maelstrom, until he was able to break free and cause the Cataclysm, even though the amazing cinematic showed him coming out of some random mountain, seemingly near the Barrens. Deepholm was actually planned to be a major hub for Cataclysm, much like the portal room in Dalaran, with us using the place as a way to teleport to all the other zones. And it makes sense too, as we'd be working to repair the damage Deathwing did so we could possibly imprison him again. Although, going a completely other way of the story, Deepholm was not used, even though it had plenty of room amongst its side rooms for everything that a hub would need. It was obviously designed to house a whole bunch of portals, but only ended up having about 1 or 2. Vashj'ir easily is one of the biggest zones for scrap stuff, so we got a lot here to cover. First, the water combat was going to be overhauled in order to make the zone much more enjoyable. That never happened. Instead, Blizzard just ended up launching Vashj'ir as is, and cut all future underwater content they had planned. Originally, the focus was supposed to be the city, with the sunken city of Vashj'ir. The city we arrived to only being an extremely minor part of the full story for the subsection of one of the zones. Continue on with Vashj'ir, we have a few things about the ancient gods there. The giant shelled beast there, who, fun fact, used the Cthulhu model as their eyeball. These creatures were meant to be so much more, and there was a lot cut about them. So let's go over this. First off, we were supposed to have far less water sections with the zone originally, with water being a majority but not all of it. A good portion of this would be spent inside these Naga cities, situated within these shells, shown originally in this bit of concept art. Second, we were supposed to find an old god corrupted version of one of these gods, a twisted amalgamation of undersea life, acting as the end boss of the zone. However, this was moved to the Abyssal Maw raid to act as one of its bosses, and as mentioned before, that never came out. Third, we were actually supposed to have a major hub within one of these ancient gods, as when we arrived to some of the Naga, they've turned them into their home bases, and so we would do the same, possibly even making it a major city. However, with the layout of the inner shell, I totally understand why they cut it. A giant circle-shaped city with no buildings and no flying sounds horrible. Also, spending all day inside a fish's body doesn't sound very fun. And enough about a zone full of fish. Fishing was supposed to be updated with little events and special quests. However, this would not come to fruition. At least till Legion, when we finally got at least some little fishing events with the baits and special fish, as well as the fishing artifact with its own little questline, scenario, and artifact tree. That required quite the long grind in order to max out. Uldum originally was supposed to be a zone focused on the Explorers League and the newly founded Reliquary fighting it off against each other for the most powerful artifacts. Of course, leaning more into archaeology, as these two factions were the archaeological factions, and the zone itself is an ancient Egyptian zone, so it was perfect, all over a giant superweapon. Although instead, Blizzard seemingly scrapped this storyline, rather late too, shoving in instead a whole bunch of Indiana Jones references. Rather well shown by the fact it is the zone with by far the least voice acting, and the least serious out of all the zones, overall acting as a failed comedy more than a compelling story. Ever since the Cataclysm beta, we've had a few unused voice lines, first of those being the unused traitors. In Cataclysm, you find within your ranks traitors, members of the Twilight Hammer who've infiltrated the factions. Archbishop Benedictus was planned to be the Alliance traitor, and Grand Magister Rommath was planned to be the Horde traitor. However, they seem to have dropped this idea early on and scrapped both of them. only to then use the idea anyway, except instead of the Horde traitor being Rommath, they instead gave the role to a random nobody named Saranok the Mystic. Rommath in lore is a blood elf who was a staunch Kael'thas supporter, and didn't change his mind on him until later on in the Burning Crusade, but was shown to be very loyal to Lor'themar after he decided to change his mind, and so his betrayal didn't make much sense. Although they could have just easily said he was pretending to be loyal to Lor'themar to gain his trust, but honestly it could have gone either way. Onto some more voice lines. We have voice lines from Bane speaking on the gate, that being the Great Gate, the massive gate that separates the Northern Barrens from Mulgore. This event seemingly having been in retaliation to the Alliance's attack on Camp Taraho. However, with Bane taking a very small role in Cataclysm, it seems they may have intended for him to take a larger role, especially after his father's death. But as soon as they did bring him to the story, they seemingly gave him a full 180 from their original idea, as he was staunchly against any kind of retaliation against the Alliance. This explains quite well why there's this massive detailed wall to Mulgore that is used for literally nothing. This could have been an extremely epic moment with him opening the gate to unleash Tauren armies upon the Alliance within the Barrens. However, instead, the Orcs simply kicked the Alliance out of the Southern Barrens on their own later on. Originally, reforging was going to be a profession thing instead of being an ethereal traitor. You would need to go to a player with profession relevant to the piece of gear to enchant it in a way. A jewel crafter to reforge your rings or necklaces, haste into mastery, a tailorer to do so with your cloth, a scribe for your staff, offhand, and trinkets, a blacksmith for your weapon or plate armor, a leatherworker for your leather, engineer for your ranged weapons. You get the deal. However, this was scrapped in preference for just an NPC. As with each new piece of gear, you'd have to go out, buy new gems, enchants, and then find various different players to reforge all your gear to get the exact hit/expertise cap would be kind of exhausting. Cthulhu was one of the most interesting old gods, and so Blizzard planned to bring him back. Within Cho'Gall's and Medan's storyline in the comics, Cho'Gall captured and forced Medan to resurrect the old god's corpse. And since at this point Medan was still planned to be part of the game, and had yet to be scrapped, this lined up perfectly with Cho'Gall planning to be a major villain in the expansion, even being a raid boss for the Bastion of Twilight. Although this never happened as Medan and his comics were abandoned, and then later retconned. However, in the alpha you would get whispers from Cthulhu and Silthus, implying his possible return. Overall, Cataclysm feels like it would have been done far better if it was split into two expansions, with one focused on the Twilight Hammer and the Followers in Azoth, with it then leading into Deathwing into the Firelands. Maybe it had been done that way, far less of the content would have been cut, and we could have seen so much more. Karabor was never actually used as the Alliance faction hub. It was used in a scenario at the end of the Shadowmoon Valley questline, and then again for a part of the Legendary Ring quest chain, and that's about it. For the Horde, they were going to have their faction city in Frostfire Ridge and help the Frostwolves take the city back. You do end up doing this in the Frostfire Ridge quest chains, and pretty early on too, but you don't ever use Bladespire as a faction hub, even though it seems to be completely set up for it and is way bigger than it needs to be for a small quest chain. In the bottom left, you can see a mysterious continent, which is described as an ogre continent in BlizzCon interviews that they planned on sending players to. We never actually end up going there, even though it's left on the game map to this day. In the top right hand corner is Farallon, which Blizzard described at BlizzCon as a zone that would be unlocked later on in Warlords of Draenor. Farallon was never actually added in a future patch, and they even removed the island from the UI map in-game, but not the physical maps in-game. Farallon seems to have been cut late in development, as before patch 6.1, you could actually go to the removed island of Farallon in-game if you had a way to get past the fatigue zone without dying. And the fatigue zone in the area where Farallon was supposed to be is still budgeted in the map, as you can go for a very long time over the sea before you hit the fatigue zone. In the PTR for patch 6.2, they had a shipyard mission which had the flavor text of going into Farallon in order to grab the Pearl of Farallon, which was supposed to be used in order to craft the Legendary Ring, which was scrapped in the PTR process, and instead you just did other things to craft the ring. Early on in the game, they had planned on Frostfire Ridge being purple for some reason, were told that it was kind of dumb, and then kind of agreed and changed it to snow. In an early map, it shows a Shattrath raid in Talador, but during all the panels and interviews at BlizzCon, whenever they bring up Shattrath, they never mention a raid associated to it, which means the planned Shattrath raid was scrapped really early in development, as during the BlizzCon panels, they were still talking about Farallon as if it was going to come out. Next, let's go over a whole bunch of features that were planned for garrisons that were never implemented. Blizzard had originally wanted players to pick any zone for them to put their garrisons in. In the live version of the game, you were not able to pick which zone you could put your garrison in, and instead only had Frostfire Ridge for Horde, or Shadowmoon Valley for Alliance. Blizzard said at BlizzCon that trophies would be a big part of the garrison, and use an example that if you killed a rare chimera out in the world, you could mount its head in your garrison. They did allow you to hang up archaeology items, but no rare mobs you killed out in the world in the way they described in the clip. At BlizzCon, Blizzard also said that you'd be able to rename your garrison followers to whatever you want to give a feel for customizing the garrison to you more personally. In the live version of the game, you could not rename any of your followers. In fact, you couldn't really name anything in your garrison at all, except for your battle pets that could follow you around if you had a tier 3 menagerie. Blizzard had plans for tier 3 buildings to have a customizable bonus you could change out, kind of like a talent in a talent tree. Instead, all 3 tier bonuses were just fixed, and you could not change what a building did at all. The original idea for sending followers out on missions was kind of treat them like real players that you would send out to do real player activities. Instead, all of the missions were exactly the same, and the only difference to them was how long they took and how hard they were to counter with their incredibly simple rock, paper, scissors system. 90% of the time you didn't even know what the flavor of the mission was, just that you needed to send a couple of followers on it in order to get the rewards. At BlizzCon, Blizzard said you'd be able to put your garrison buildings wherever you wanted because they really wanted you to be able to customize your garrison however you wanted. This statement makes it seem like you could put your buildings literally wherever you wanted, when really you could just choose one of 2 plots at incredibly fixed locations, which were so minorly customizable that it's almost laughable to think of that as what was stated in the clip. When they announced the new tertiary stats for Warlords of Draenor, alongside an early version of Leech, Speed, Avoidance, and Indestructible, they also had Cleave as one of those extra stats you can get on your gear, which are also known as a minor attribute. Minor attributes have an incredibly low chance to proc on your gear, and generally are just bonuses that don't contribute too much to DPS. The Cleave stat seems like it was a pure DPS increase though, similar to Sockets, which is probably why they never added in the Cleave stat. At BlizzCon's Q&A, a player asked them if they knew who the final boss of Warlords of Draenor would be, or if they could give any hints, and they very confidently said it would be Grommash Hellscream. Grommash Hellscream was not the final boss of Warlords of Draenor, it was instead Archimonde, which Grommash Hellscream does help you defeat Archimonde in the final battle. According to an early map, the Chronos Spire was meant to be the entrance point into Draenor, where it was speculated you would then stop the Iron Horde from finishing building the Dark Portal. The Chronos Spire seems to have been scrapped early in development, as it didn't actually appear in any alpha or beta files at all, unlike Farallon. In lore, at the end of the War Crimes book, Kairos helps Garrosh escape trial by using a giant hourglass, so it makes sense that a giant hourglass would be the central hub in order to get into Draenor. However, they moved the location of where Kairos brought Garrosh to a spot in Negran, where there is no hourglasses at all nearby, and just the corpse of Kairos himself. There's an item which was added to the game files called 6.0 Weapon Axe Two-Handed Gorehowl Remake Grom Hellscream Only, which has the model of a high-quality Gorehowl. There is speculation this was added to the game to be a legendary item, because of this line of dialogue from an interview at Gamescom. Interview with colleagues, you said there could be another legendary apart from the ring type? What legendaries there could be then? We could imagine a legendary Gorehowl. That would be possible. Terran Gore also has a very nice staff. Yeah, that's a pretty cool staff. So this is also possible. We will see. If we see the imaginary Gorehowl, would it be just for Death Knights, Warriors, Paladins? Fictional warriors, of course. Probably to anyone who could carry a two-handed axe. So there was never any data mine legendary weapon, just this trash item, which I guess could be counted as cut content based on this interview. The Broken Horn Village is an abandoned village located in Gorgon which has nothing associated to it, but is friendly to Horde players and hostile to Alliance players. It's fully stocked with named NPCs and houses, and flies the banner of the Laughing Skull Clan, which is a reputation that Horde players can grind out with a level 2 trading post. It's speculated this was planned to be a quest hub or reputation center. The village itself is in the game, it's just not associated to anything, and there's no reason to ever go there. During the beta, Kargrath Bladefist, the first boss in Highmaul, originally survived the encounter at 1 health and ran away, leaving his hook behind to be looted. During the live version of the game, he just dies, and you can loot his body like normal. This was probably changed when they changed their mind on how they were going to finish off the storyline. During a blog post on a Blizzard French site, Blizzard announced class accessories, which would have no gameplay effect and just be something cool you could unlock and upgrade to get cooler appearances. It was quickly taken down and no mention of it was ever talked about again. There was some speculation that Zangomarsh was going to be its own zone, but even alpha footage shows that it was always underwater, so if that was the case, it was going to be a purely underwater zone like Vashj'ir. The zone even had its own soundtrack, and it has lots of work put into it, but was only ever actually involved in like 1 or 2 quests in the live version of the game. There was also art for a fungal world boss whale, which was never added, probably because they abandoned whatever ideas they had for the underwater zone. In the game files, they added 4 new Battleground files, called Small Battleground A, B, C, and D. Small Battleground A was just a whole bunch of assets taken from Bladespire Citadel, the scrapped Horde Capital, assets from the Battle for Gilneas, and some assets from Wintergrass, and doesn't really seem to have any cohesion on how it was supposed to be played. Small Battleground B is just a winter version for Rothi Basin, which was eventually released in Legion. Small Battleground C is just an empty plot of land. And Small Battleground D was also an empty plot of land, which was changed to a copy of Deepwind Gorge during patch 6.2 in Warlords of Draenor. During the promotional materials titled Ages of War Awaits, there's a segment that says they were going to do new normal and heroic scenarios, which were 3-man mini-dungeons added in Mist of Pandaria, which haven't really been used since Mist of Pandaria. They had obviously planned on continuing the feature, but then scrapped it for whatever reason, and now only use it for solo quests. In alpha footage of Gorgon, you can see trains and train tracks at various points in the zone. These were eventually removed, and the only reference to them is in a dungeon, which confusingly has a fight on a train going through Gorgon, which doesn't actually exist in the open world version of Gorgon. This is a case of scrapped content directly influencing a dungeon that was probably too far along in development to completely change, so they just left it in anyway without really explaining it. In early development, there was a quest line which had you help Tess Greymane find some herbs that would help stop the degradation of the Worgen Curse. This was eventually scrapped and replaced with a Fiona storyline to get a plant in order to heal a sick dwarf instead. The likely reason this was changed was because the Tess Greymane plot point brings up actual major lore consequences, and they probably didn't intend to tackle such a large issue in a minor quest. In some early builds in the alpha, there were dialogues data mined involving both Murad and Yrel, which strongly hinted they were going to be in a relationship, as I'll be showing them on screen. This was eventually changed at some point, probably when they rewrote the storyline for Talador, and instead Murad dies in one of the cinematics. There were a couple of islands included in the early versions of the map, in addition to Farallon and the Ogre Continent, which were never given any mentions about what they might be, and were removed from the map alongside Farallon, although the Ogre Continent still stays on the map funny enough, even to this day. Medivh had a short cameo talking to Gul'dan as a shadowy figure during the early stages of WoD. However, it was removed by launch. Having Medivh in the picture would open up alternative Azeroth storylines, so it was most likely removed to not have to deal with those major lore implications, similar to why they removed the Feral Worgen storyline. Trial of the Gladiator was supposed to be a new arena mode which would fix a lot of the problems in Arena, by putting everyone on an even gear playing field, and also forcing players to queue at the same times in order to avoid match fixing. This was eventually cut, and Blizzard even gave an update on it, stating that the reason they cut it was because they didn't want to punish people who weren't able to play at the preset times for the Trial of the Gladiator, so they just scrapped the whole thing and reintroduced the skirmish system instead. When Blizzard was deciding on an MMO to make, they debated on whether or not to make it a fantasy one or sci-fi. They eventually decided on fantasy because it was more relatable. Sci-fi is full of gadgets and weapons that the average person has probably never heard of, while fantasy has swords and magic, very simple, familiar concepts even children know about. Also, you can be more in your face with sword combat than firearms and lasers. So since they decided on fantasy, they just picked the story of Warcraft to incorporate into, since they already had the 2 Warcraft games and Warcraft 3 in late development. Player housing was on the table since the very beginning. The devs were playing the new Animal Crossing game at the time and liked its day and night cycle, and how you had to wait for your fruit to grow and mail to arrive, which made them think about how they could incorporate this with player housing. Eventually though, the only part of that to make it into the game was the real-time day and night cycle. There was even a marker for the day-night cycle on the minimap where the calendar is at today, since Vanilla WoW didn't have an in-game calendar. After creating the procedurally generated clouds, the team got to work on procedurally generated water, because they had plans for players to be able to play Naga as a playable race. And if they were going to have an aquatic race, they needed good water effects. Eventually though, they found out procedurally generated water took up too much space and wasn't worth it, as they really pushed hard for WoW to be workable on low-end computers, which contributed heavily to its massive success. And later on, when working on armor, they dropped the Naga for good, once they found out how difficult it would be to get armor to work for the snake-like race. Ghouls were the dev team's favorite test monsters, because it was the first one to have all of its animations programmed and fully animated. So when they first added spells to the game, ghouls were used to test them out, and they even had ghouls cast Blizzard on aggroed players, as kind of a joke for a bit. Some of the first ever dungeons made, in an unfinished state, were the Deadmines, Uldum, Karazhan, and Tol Barad. Deadmines and Uldum did make it into vanilla, but Karazhan wasn't added to the game until the Burning Crusade, and Tol Barad wasn't added until Cataclysm. These 4 initial dungeons were eventually scrapped and remade, when they moved over to a new dungeon editor, but it goes to show how early some of the later additions to WoW were being planned. The first working name for Undercity was Necropolis. Remember, early brainstorming of WoW was done before Warcraft 3 was finished. Also, the internal team called the Forsaken the Scourge for the longest time, despite Chris Metzen telling them the difference and why they should be called Forsaken and not Scourge. The Scourge was the minion still controlled by the Lich King and his forces, and the Forsaken were former Scourge members who broke free and worked under Sylvanas, which to the dev team was basically the same thing. And again, this was because Warcraft 3 wasn't out yet, so they hadn't played through Sylvanas' campaign yet to find out what the big deal was. Which I thought was just kind of funny. Even later on in the development cycle, most dev team members still called them the Scourge because they thought it might be fun to play as an evil race, and tried to even convince Chris Metzen of this, to no success. Or to major success, depending on if you're an Alliance main or not. Early plans for classes included 2 classes not in the game, called Assassins and Rune Masters. Assassins were eventually just turned into rogues, and Rune Masters were supposed to be like enchanters who wrote runes on their bodies to give them different physical powers, and were even considered when making the first hero class alongside Death Knights or Necromancers. Eventually, though, a lot of the features of the Rune Master were given to the Death Knight and Monk, and in place of Rune Masters, they put in Druids, who were actually not on the original list of classes to be added. The Dark Portal didn't have a static location, despite its major lore relevance, so it was constantly moving locations in WoW development, at one point being next to Teldrassil, and another moment being located underwater in Azshara, because they thought it would be cool to have it submerged in water, before finally being settled down in the Blasted Lands. And just a note, this piece of trivia actually solves a lot of long-held speculation about the Dark Portal in alpha and beta clients. You see, there are models of the Dark Portal in lots of random places in the world on the alpha clients of WoW, and people always speculated that they were just used as placeholders for raids, dungeons, or battleground entrances, with the one off the coast of Azshara drawing the most amounts of speculation, as there was never anything added to that zone. But there was a scrapped battleground for the zone, so people just assumed it was for that, or a planned Naga raid. But it turns out, nope. The Dark Portals were literally placed there because that's where Blizzard thought they might want the Dark Portal to be for a short time, leaving a long-time mystery finally solved. Sometimes it's the simplest explanations that turn out to be the true ones. WoW's original design idea with quests was just to have enough to send you to other parts of the zone to explore it fully, until eventually you'd just grind mobs until you were high enough level to leave to the next zone. Most early MMO games required lots of mob grinding, so WoW wasn't going to be any different. But in testing, players were going into other zones too early after finishing all their quests, and were dying to the high level mobs. So Blizzard added in more quests to the zone than normal, and thus accidentally created engaging solo content, which was a big part of WoW's early success. So, in an effort to solve a navigation problem of people leaving zones too early, Blizzard, by accident, created its main selling point against other MMOs at the time, being able to quest to max level, instead of requiring a mob grind. Although, there was still mob grinding in vanilla WoW, I might want to point out. It's just, if you were smart about your leveling path, you didn't really need to. It took a day and a half on average to create an attack animation for one race and gender. So, for example, after making all 60 attack animations for an orc male, They'd then move on to all 60 animations for an orc female, which means it took an incredibly long time to add all of the animations to the game. Northshire Abbey was the first piece of detailed architecture added to the game, outside of the default house models. In fact, all of the first buildings and zones were Alliance ones. They pretty much had Stormwind done and finished before working on Kalimdor, but that was mainly because they wanted to have a working piece to show off at conventions, so it made more sense to have a few zones close together done. So they worked on the first 4 human zones first. While discussing basic game concepts like PvP, spell structure, and item properties, they also had a thing called life quests planned, which were supposed to be character campaigns, probably similar to the overhaul campaigns of Legion. What a life quest could have been is all up for speculation, but I'd assume it would be similar to what class quests were like, but for racial abilities for your character, or even things needed to maybe unlock player housing. When the game Anarchy Online came out, a lot of the dev team loved the procedurally created dungeons, and wanted to have them in WoW too. Thankfully, they decided against this idea ultimately for a few reasons. One being it was too much work and might overload people's PCs, and dungeons were some of the hardest things to program. And 2, because they thought handcrafted dungeons would feel better, which I think was a good call. Goblins were another race planned for Vanilla WoW, at around the same time they started working on the trolls and gnomes. But they held off on making them because the bandwidth for all the machines and gizmos was too high, and they wanted to make the goblin starting zone amazing. The reason most dungeons had a whole bunch of trash mobs and traveling in front of them before you could get to the instance was because it was meant for people who were looking for a group to kill those mobs while they waited for a party to form. That way, they had something to do and could get a bit of mob grinding done while waiting, as this was common practice in EverQuest. That's why if you try to run to the entrance of Wailing Caverns, there's a little maze and tunnel system full of mobs in front of it. In WoW's earliest alpha, it was possible to kill AFK players by placing a campfire under their feet, which would slowly kill them due to fire damage. So they then changed it so player-created fire could do no damage. Early plans for quests included having cross-continental journey quests at around level 40, since they thought people would want to explore with their new mounts and go to far-off places, since back in Vanilla WoW you got your first mount at level 40. But that ended up being a terrible idea, as all that travel time was just downtime, so they cut them to smaller areas, and only left a few massive journey quests in the game, like the Call of Water quest for Shaman's water totems, for example. The Dwarven airfield was made to just have something neat to look at while on a flight path. Apparently, Blizzard put a lot of things like this in the game for the sole purpose of just adding flavor to flight paths, since flight paths were a new thing to MMOs at the time, leaving long-time speculation about why the airfield was up in a hidden area, and if Blizzard maybe scrapped it because they ran out of time to finish it, to rest. Turns out, it was just there for funsies, because someone thought it might look neat. When thinking of what to do for the vanilla cinematic, Chris Metzen really wanted to do a feature showing the Titans creating the world, which was shot down to instead focus on the various races and classes of the game. The first expansion was going to be the South Seas, with pirates and stuff, because that's also when the Pirates of the Caribbean movies came out for the first time and were super popular. The main reason they went to Outlands instead was because they needed another world tab, because they literally couldn't add more zones to the world map, until later on when they got server upgrades. And we didn't actually get the South Seas expansion until 2018, with the Battle for Azeroth. Player housing was on the table since pretty much the beginning of WoW's development, all the way until launch, and probably for some time after. But some of the reasons they decided not to have it in Vanilla WoW was because they thought it was too much time and effort for something that wasn't really important, and because they thought it was a dead-end system, and they couldn't find a way to make it fun. Whatever that means. But there is also confirmation that the unused portal in Stormwind from pre-Cata WoW was indeed supposed to take you to your player housing. There were 3 additional planned races for Vanilla WoW, with Naga, Goblins, and Demons being cut from the game. Naga because there was too many problems with them when it came to armor, as pants and boots wouldn't work with their snake-like tails, and sitting them on mounts was a challenge. Demons were supposed to be shapeshifters, but that would require too much work to implement, so it was easier to just cut them out of the game. And Goblins were cut because they wanted the starting zone to be amazing and have all kinds of machines and gizmos, but they wouldn't be able to reuse all that they had planned, so it would be too much work to have all of those things created for just one zone, so they were put on hold until Cataclysm instead. Ogres were also considered for a playable race for a short time, but no one could think of a good model for female ogres, so instead of solving that problem, it was just dropped. Plus, the Horde already had Tauren as a big race, and they didn't want to give them 2 of them, as ogres have historically been part of the Horde. Alterac Valley was the first battleground Blizzard worked on, but it wasn't ready in time for launch, so it was pushed back into a later patch and released alongside Warsong Gulch. Achievements were planned to be part of Vanilla WoW, but were put on hold alongside PvP, hero classes, multi-classes, guild raid content, and player housing. As PvP wasn't balanced for WoW's launch, it was considered put on hold, along with any kind of reward systems for PvP, which weren't added until later patches. Hero classes were tried with Death Knights and quickly abandoned for being too overpowered. Multi-classes never happened, alongside guild raids and player housing. When putting fishing into the game, they were nervous that hackers could use it to disrupt the economy, as it was the only activity in the game which gave rewards that could be performed without risk. That's why they also added a little mini-game of clicking the bobber when you caught something, in order to make it harder for hackers to automate. Dead Mines was one of the first playable dungeons, and the devs liked it enough to use it as a benchmark for how long other dungeons should be, and that high-level dungeons should be longer than it. Blizzard made sure their high-level dungeons were the biggest. That's why in future versions of the game, they cut those old high-level dungeons into parts when putting them into the LFG tool, as they were too big. After the launch of the game, players liked the small, quick dungeons the best, like the different wings of the Scarlet Monastery. And that's why Blizzard went with the quicker, smaller dungeons as the game progressed, instead of continuing with the large, complex, exploratory dungeons that they used to have. When it came to raids, they were told to make them even bigger than the already big high-level dungeons. So after working on Karazhan, one of the first raids worked on despite not being released until the Burning Crusade, they made it too big and had to cut back on it a lot. And that's probably why the Karazhan crypts were never made use of. The book doesn't specify the crypts by name, but it does say they had to completely cut the wine cellars and the undead catacombs part of Karazhan. Late in WoW's development, the talent trees were added as a fun way to gain power as you leveled up. Before, they had a system that allowed you to spend points into various stats, but no matter what they did to make fun alternative stats, people would always just spend all of their points into the best ones. So warriors would only put points into strength, and mages only into intellect, which ended up not being very fun. So they were scrapped, and the talent trees were added instead. And that's probably why so many specs were useless in Vanilla WoW. They were more or less leveling up rewards and not really balanced around endgame content, and didn't receive major overhauls until almost halfway through Vanilla when they decided to address one class at a time each patch. The Plaguelands and Silithus were the last 2 zones worked on that made it into the game, which might explain why Silithus was empty at launch. The last zone being worked on before Vanilla WoW launched was the Emerald Dream, which was eventually just scrapped as they weren't happy with how it turned out. They wanted it to be this dreamlike place where anything could happen, but it ended up just looking kind of goofy and really green, so they abandoned the idea as it was too hard to realize. The Emerald Dream was never actually added as a zone at all, despite its major lore relevance, but it did make it into the game in other ways, as part of it can be entered in the Emerald Nightmare and the Druid Order Hall. The death effects of the world going all grey and spooky were added after the dev team saw the Lord of the Rings movie, and liked how the effect was used in the movie. Vehicles were planned to be a feature in vanilla PvP, but they couldn't figure out a way to make it work. Vehicle combat didn't make it into the game until Wrath, when it was used for 3 Battlegrounds, and then never used in a Battleground afterwards, since people didn't actually like vehicle combat very much. The Horde stuff was worked on last, so it didn't receive anywhere near as much polish as the Alliance zones, and even had less content in some areas. On screen, you can see a copy I made of one of the earliest maps of Azeroth made, because the image in the book was really low quality and hard to see, while still in the planning stages of WoW before anything else was made. The first biggest thing that stands out is the giant continent of Ulduar below a quarter-sized Kalimdor. Ulduar was eventually turned into a raid in Northrend during Wrath of the Lich King, and is located at this point on the map. But it seems like Blizzard might have had some much bigger plans for it. Kalimdor was also about 1/4 the size in this version than it was in the final map, but then again, Ulduar was down there taking up all its space, so that makes sense. Nazjatar, the Naga homeworld, was in the middle of the map instead of the Maelstrom, which was oddly off to the side, in between the Undermine and Tomb of Sargeras. The Undermine is the name of the underground city below the Goblin starting zone of Kazan. And finally, Kulturas was a much smaller island nation in the bay between Azeroth and Lordaeron, as Kulturas has always been an important island in lore, even though we didn't actually go there until very recently in-game. And of course, the Eastern Kingdoms was known as Azeroth before it was changed to the name of the whole planet, but everyone already knew that. The Molten Core raid was created really late in development as kind of an afterthought. One day, they asked the dungeon designer if he could make a quick raid, as simple as possible, because they needed it ASAP, and players, sadly, didn't really care about how it would look. They just needed a big cave. So, Molten Core was created in 1 week, the fastest of any dungeon or raid in the game, and players universally loved it and its design. In fact, Molten Core was also the smallest dungeon vial, 1/4 the size of the second smallest dungeon, despite being a raid. When testing Molten Core with a raid of devs, they couldn't get past the trash without wiping multiple times. It's not that the trash was overtuned or anything, it's just everyone was really bad, so Molten Core was the first and last raid tested in-house by developers. Also, as a side note, while they were testing Molten Core, they used player-created DPS meter add-ons to measure their combat numbers, rather than make one of their own. Karazhan looked completely different. It was modeled after a Chinese-style castle instead of a more medieval European look that it has today. The model in the alpha wasn't even close to finish. Only the outside had color to it, and it was on an elevated platform, so you couldn't even get into it. Also, Deadwing Pass was just a lot more rockier with tons of spikes. And just like in vanilla, there were a few places that could be reached in the world that players weren't really supposed to go to. One of those was Programmer Island. In Programmer's Island, there isn't much, just a random temple, a tower, some boxes, a giant hole with water sound effects if you go close enough, and some words spelled out on the floor. The ones below the giant hole simply spell out fast. The ones to the right spell out the sentence, "Chow is my love monkey." We've also got another place simply called On-Map Dungeon, which is just what something is called when it has no name. This place far off the coast of Kalimdor has many human houses of all shapes and sizes that they come in game. Off to the side, there are more houses, and underwater, more houses still. Not sure why there are so many houses underwater. Of course, that wasn't even the only place with underwater houses. In a completely different part of Kalimdor off the coast is this other row of houses. The only real difference is the larger than normal amount of them, and the fact that these ones are all the same. I've heard rumors that this was supposed to be a test neighborhood for player housing, but there's no real credit to any of those rumors, at least there wasn't when this video was first made, but we now have confirmation from the WoW Diary. There were 2 islands that didn't make it to live in the alpha. The first one being the Isle of Dr. Lapis. The entire island looks like a troll dungeon, has random towers that are fully detailed inside, and a random ghost town with all the buildings looking like houses in the undead starting zone, full of skeletons. I assume this was supposed to be a creepy place. Gilligan's Island, same thing, looks like troll dungeons, has a dead turtle on the beach, same model as the turtle submarines used in Warcraft 2, even big enough to go inside. Also, crashed ships from Warcraft 2, and the decomposing body of a sea monster. Might be a reference to something, not sure. If you do, let me know what it is. See this giant desert? That's Uldum. As you can see, there's nothing there. But there wasn't anything there on live either, just a gate blocking it off. Winter Spring was all green. Easy enough to understand, turning it white later on seems like an easy thing to do, and green is easier to work with since it stands out so much. But funny enough, all the trees and rocks in the zone do have white snow on them. The famous Help Easter egg in the Stone Talon Mountains was in the game since Alpha, but is no longer in the game today. The entrance to the Caverns of Time looked very different. It looks more like the entrance to a hidden fortress than just the opening to a cave. The Iron Forge in Alpha was way larger than it was in Vanilla and even had a second level. Also, the center of Iron Forge is a giant metal machine. Undercity is also a lot different. The quarter where the auctioneers are located is filled with slime, with bridges leading to the out sections where the trainers and vendors are located. In the outer quarter, there's an easier access to the second level of Undercity, as well as what looks like vendor stalls, which meant Blizzard probably had some plans to actually use the second level of Undercity. It's still there today, it's just kind of hidden and hard to get to. Also, the elevators are in different locations. Strathholm was going to be an outside zone. Blizzard turned it into a dungeon later. Also, the Naxxramas entrance was going to be inside Strathholm, just like how Molten Core was inside Blackrock Depths, and Blackwing Lair was near Upper Blackrock Spire. Blizzard was trying to make it a thing where raids were just located inside of dungeons. Luckily, they stopped this trend almost immediately. There was this random Statue of Liberty object off the coast of Stranglethorn Vale. And finally, behind the Gilnean wall, there was, unsurprisingly, nothing. The content behind the wall wasn't really added until Cataclysm anyway. If you've ever run Blackrock Depths in Classic WoW, you'll know that the dungeon is massive, probably the biggest dungeon in the game, and it even has the raid entrance to Molten Core inside of it. But did you know they had plans to make it even bigger? In the Dark Iron Highway section of the dungeon, there's a boss at the end of the road in front of a big unused door called Belgar, and the door was put there as an excuse to have a road leading to the city. The thought was that what was behind it might eventually be turned into another raid. And in the boss dungeon journal, it says, "The monstrous molten giant Belgar lumbers across the Dark Iron Highway, a stunning feat of dwarven engineering carved into Blackrock Depths. Ragnaros pulled the giant from the heart of the Firelands to guard a massive sealed door at one end of the highway. According to legend, only the Fire Lord and the Dark Iron clan's highest-ranking members know what lies beyond the mysterious gate." Now, currently, there is nothing behind the door, and there has never been any mention about what's actually behind it. But according to an interview with John Statz, the level designer who created Blackrock Depths, they did have plans to put something there. And that's why they had this big room leading to a door that was closed, to add mystery to the whole event for when they would eventually add the extra dungeon in this place. So, why didn't they ever go back to this room and add a dungeon here? Well, because the dungeon was already too big as is. There was already so much going on in there, and there was already a raid entrance in the dungeon that the designers thought they had gone a little bit too far, and that maybe they had added too much to this one place. So adding an additional instance to the dungeon was probably not the best idea, considering they already had so much else going on in the mountain, with Blackrock Depths, the lower and upper spires, plus Molten Core and the Blackwing Lair. I can see why they decided not to add an additional dungeon when they already had so much going on in the mountain, and instead prioritize those resources onto making something new. And there you have it, kind of a short little video. There's not much more information on this, as John Statz only talked about it in passing in one interview, and never really mentioned again in other interviews, despite the fact that he talked about this dungeon many times, which is kind of another signal that this wasn't really a super big deal, and was probably thrown in as a random cool idea. That's how pretty much everything in WoW was made. Someone just had a cool idea about something, and they just kind of made it work with the world and lore. For some very dedicated wall jumpers and explorers in vanilla WoW, they were able to discover an early version of Hellfire Peninsula, which was the first zone in the Burning Crusade expansion, which led many people to believe that Blizzard had planned to add Outland to vanilla WoW instead of it being its own expansion. And there's even some videos online of people exploring the area, and it seems like there's a lot that was done, and a lot of its inspirations were used with the actual Hellfire Peninsula. But, according to an interview with a vanilla WoW developer, that early Hellfire map was most likely just someone playing around with assets, as they never had any plans to add it to vanilla WoW. And in fact, they didn't even really want to go to Outlands as their first expansion. The first expansion they wanted to have was the South Seas, with pirates and stuff, because the Pirates of the Caribbean movies came out and were super popular at the time. So we could have gotten the BFA expansion, with players going to Kulturas and Zandalar, as the first expansion, rather than like the 7th. And the reason they didn't do that was because of hardware limitations. They literally couldn't add any more maps to the original world map, so they had to create another world tab, which is the main reason why they decided to go with Outlands. That way, they could just put it all in its own world tab, and they could just have players teleport to it when they went to the zones. As if you didn't know, all of Outlands is on the same map as the Blood Elf and Draenei starting zones. If you're able to go out of bounds and go way far into the Fatigue Zone, you could potentially fly into the Blood Elf starting zone, the Ghostland, or the Draenei starting zone and its extended zone afterwards. Basically, all of the zones added in the Burning Crusade took place on this one world map, because they just didn't have the hardware to put them on their own yet. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, but apparently this was the best way for them to do it at the time. Eventually, they got server upgrades where this was no longer a big deal, and that's why the next expansion took place in Northrend, which is another map on the Azeroth map, and then they didn't really have the limitations on the Azeroth map after that, so they eventually did the South Seas expansion, which is the current expansion we're in right now, basically. Now, it's a wonder why this never-used version of Hellfire Peninsula snuck its way into the game. But hey, they did have the developer playgrounds in the game files as well, that you could technically get to if you were very creative about using game mechanics, or exploiting. So it's not too far-fetched to believe that the Hellfire Peninsula map was also just one of those assets. Although it is kind of hard to believe that they had no plans to add Outland maps, considering they did have plans for the Emerald Dream, which was also a cut thing that they couldn't do correctly. But apparently they had no such plans for Outlands in Vanilla WoW, and Outlands wasn't even their first choice as an expansion. Kaladar was the name Blizzard originally gave the island that the world tree Teldrassil was going to be on top of. Once Teldrassil outgrew the island, they decided to build the city on top of it. But there were plans for the island to still be called Kaladar anyway. Eventually, though, Blizzard kind of retconned the name of the island and just referred to it as Teldrassil at all times, even when not talking about the tree itself. But since the original name of the island was Kaladar, a lot of the map assets of the tree are referred to as belonging to the Zone of Kaladar, and a lot of the map assets are located in the folder called Kaladar on the WoW's client. And not only that, Kaladar was also the name of a battleground in Alpha WoW's testing, which never actually made it into the game. It seems Blizzard was 100% ready to go with the name Kaladar before they decided to just use Teldrassil for everything. In the Beta WoW and Alpha WoW clients, there existed two troll islands off the coast of Stranglethorn Vale, called the Island of Dr. Lapis and Gilligim's Island. Now, what's unique about both of these islands is that they were both basically done and were almost completely textured and full of trees, ruins, artifacts on the beach, and even a few houses and small abandoned towns and caves. Although, none of these textures were unique, which means they did eventually use everything on this island somewhere else in WoW. Now, considering both of these islands existed in lore, and showed up a lot in the early WoW maps, it's a mystery as to why they were removed. But then again, a lot of stuff was removed for pretty mundane reasons, as we found out in the WoW Diary book, which came out last year. In the Warlords of Draenor beta, a new battleground was added to the game files called Heroes Through Time. Based on a Twitter comment of someone asking the PvP director about the island, Blizzard stated that it was an idea they were experimenting with, but that they eventually decided not to go with it in Warlords. The map is structured very similar to most Battleground maps, as it has basically mirrored maps on both sides of the island, with the top half looking like it probably belonged to the Alliance, as it's all clean and proper and green, with the bottom half looking like it was probably the Horde zone, with red buildings and a little bit more rough in its architecture. Not much more is known about this island, though. And at number 7, we have the Stormwind Warrior District. In Cataclysm, Blizzard experimented with another version of Old Town that included a retextured version of Stormwind Keep. Since Blizzard had to redesign Stormwind to account for flying in Cataclysm, it's possible they were planning on adding another district to Stormwind, called the Warrior District. Although this portion of Stormwind went unused and was never fully developed, so it's most likely just an idea they were throwing about. One that they put a little bit more time and effort into than they usually would, considering it also made it into the game files. And at number 6, we have another unused battleground, and that's the Defense of the Ale House. This battleground map made it into the game files during Mists of Pandaria in patch 5.2, and is a 3-lane battleground which seems to take place in Townlong Steppes. Now, seeing as the name of the battleground is a pretty obvious reference to the Defense of the Ancients, which was the original name of Dota, it seems like this map was supposed to be a MOBA mode for a battleground. While I have no clue how a MOBA would work with WoW's gameplay and battleground mechanics, being a fan of the MOBA genre myself, I would have loved to have seen Blizzard attempt to do it anyway, although it seems like they have no intentions of coming back to this map, and sadly, they probably won't ever release it. And at number 5, we have the Undead Nerubian Beast model. With the Wrath of the Lich King beta, a new model is added to the game files, simply named Undead Nerubian Beast. This model has 5 different color variations, but no animations, which is pretty standard for models added to the game files, but never actually used in the game. They don't usually waste time animating models they don't intend to use. Now, considering there are plenty of Undead Nerubians in Wrath of the Lich King, it's pretty obvious why they made this, as it was probably a prototype for what the Nerubians were going to be in the game. And then they just ended up going with the models we actually got in the game instead. Although these could have just been another variation of them, but whatever the case, eventually they were scrapped and just never removed from the game files. And at number 4, we have some unused voice files. It's pretty rare for them to have voice actors record lines they never intend to use, and in this instance we have voice lines for Runas the Shamed. In NPC, players get to know very well while questing in Legion through the Azuna zone. Now, in the questing zone, Runas is an NPC you come across as a wizard trying to attack you. After you beat him up a little bit, he decides to help you out, and tells you about an invasion planned by a horde of other wizards who want to attack the blue dragons and steal their mana. And during the quest chain, Runas constantly talks about how he would never think of betraying you, and at the very end, he keeps true to his word, and dies due to his mana withdrawals. Now, with the unused voice lines of Runas, we get a different ending to this quest chain. In the voice lines, Runas talks about taking the Tidestone, attacking the blue dragons, and stealing all their mana crystals. Currently, Runas is remembered fondly because of what actually went down in-game, where he helps players. So, I think it was a good move that they didn't go with the betrayal storyline, that these unused voice files hint were a planned option. And at number 3, we have the Items of Proficiency. This was a series of items which would give extra skills in certain weapons, up to a maximum of +7 in that weapon skill, which is incredibly high. So basically, there are some items in the game that give random stats, and they generally fit to a kind of theme based on the name of that item. So, an item of the bear, for example, would always have strength and stamina on it. An item named of the tiger would always have strength and agility. And so on and so on. They would group up the stats based on arbitrary names. So they had random stats, but were always related to whatever they were named after. And sometimes would even be specific, like of shadow protection, which would give increased stamina and shadow resistance. And of proficiency items gave +1 through +7 in all weapon skills. But these items were never actually added to the game. And there was a pair of gloves in Vanilla WoW that were incredibly sought after because they gave weapon skills. And I think these gloves gave +7 weapon skills in 3 different weapons. So, if these of proficiency items would have been added, they probably would have been very sought after, which is why they were probably never added. But these items were completely programmed into the game, so you could even create macros that would link to them, despite the fact that none of them actually existed. And at number 2, we have some more unused voice files, and these are for Lor'themar and Rommath. There is a whole set of voice lines indicating that Rommath was supposed to be the traitor during the Cataclysm for the Endtime dungeon. During Cataclysm, there was a Twilight cultist traitor in both the Horde and Alliance, who was feeding information to Deathwing, and caused a lot of problems in the Horde. On the Alliance side, the traitor ended up being Archbishop Benedictus, which was kind of a big deal as he was a major lore figure. So for the Horde side to be Rommath just kind of made sense in relation. Rommath, for those of you who don't know, is one of the few lore-important Blood Elf NPCs, and is always accompanying Lor'themar, and is located in-game next to Lor'themar and Silvermoon. He has been involved in a lot of points in WoW, including being the NPC Horde players talk to during the Purging of Dalaran scenario of Mists of Pandaria. and he was also one of Kael'thas's staunchest and most loyal supporters, but turned away from Kael'thas and sided with Lor'themar instead when he found out how far Kael'thas had fallen, which was a big deal for his character. So he was a morally good character who wanted the best for his people, and there's a reason why they changed his planned traitor status, because it didn't really fit with his pre-established lore. Now, the voice files themselves basically just have Lor'themar accusing Rommath of being the Twilight traitor, shows him proof, and then there's voice lines of them fighting each other.
Rommath, you stand accused of high treason to Silvermoon, and of being a member of the Twilight Council.
Ah, the long knives come out. Is there proof to these accusations?
This document. It's your handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere.
You leave me no choice, then. It's a pity, really. I had plans for our people. There is a war coming, and I've chosen to be on the winning side. You forced my hand a little early, perhaps, but I think you'll find I'm still playing from a position of strength. Feel my wrath!
And at number 1, we have the Wrath of the Lich King server first titles. Back in Wrath of the Lich King is when Blizzard added achievements to the game, including the idea of getting titles attached to your characters based on certain achievements. And there was a series of feat of strengths you can get in-game for being the first person on your server to hit max level, get the highest level and the newest level of professions, and for being the first person to complete the Northrend Vanguard achievement, which was an achievement for getting exalted reputations with all of the Northrend reputations available at the beginning of the expansion. Getting server first in any of these 3 things would award you with the server first feat of strength, and a special title that only you would have. Like, for example, the first priest on the server to hit level 80 would get the Prophet title. The first Grandmaster Enchanter would get the Grandmaster Enchanter title. And the first Northrend Vanguard would get the Hero of Northrend title. And only that one person could get that one title per server. Now, there was a huge outcry in the forums over these titles, so during the beta, Blizzard removed the titles associated to these achievements, and only left in the titles granted for getting the server first raid kills. People really didn't like the idea of only one person having an exclusive title, but were a little bit more okay with a group of people having an exclusive title for achieving a legitimately hard feat, like getting a server first raid kill. Eventually, Blizzard removed server first achievements altogether, but it seems like it was a neat idea to get an exclusive title like that. And at number 10, we have Crusader Strike and Holy Strike. Now, I've already made a whole video about these 2 abilities and why they were removed, so I'll keep it brief at this part. Basically, Crusader Strike was a Ret Paladin ability that did damage and put a debuff on the target that increased your holy damage that would stack up to 5 times. And this ability had no cooldown, so it was an actual spammable ability that Ret Paladins had access to. And Holy Strike was just like the Warrior's Heroic Strike, except it did holy damage. Now, after I made my video on these 2 abilities, a fan then linked me an interview with Kevin Jordan on a podcast, who was one of the 3 original game designers on the Vanilla WoW team. And in that podcast, someone asked him why Crusader Strike and Holy Strike were removed from beta Paladins. And I'll play you an audio clip of what his answer to that question was.
The early beta incarnation of the Paladin was very much placeholder. A lot of the early classes, sort of before they hit, final testing, had a lot of placeholder abilities. Well, he needs buttons to push while he's running around, but we're not quite ready with their full systems. So a lot of people just had buttons to push, right? And that's exactly what those abilities were. And once the Seal and Judgment system came to light, we wanted that entire system to be sort of all-inclusive. And the previous strikes that weren't connected to that system no longer fit within that mold. So they would have felt really odd, next to all the other abilities.
So basically, Crusader Strike and Holy Strike were just placeholder abilities. And they had planned on adding the Seal system, which Paladins eventually got the entire time. They just kind of added it very late in development, as the Seal system wasn't implemented until about 2 weeks before the game went live. So it was a very last-second change with almost no testing at all. And it wasn't a very popular DPS system. And since this change was so last-second, Mobs in the old school Scarlet Monastery still used the old school's Crusader Strike and Holy Strike abilities, as they were modeled after beta paladins. And at number 9, we have Trip. Now, for some of the abilities I'm going to talk about in this video, I don't actually know which class they belong to specifically, so I might need to make an educated guess for one or two of them, and I'm pretty sure Trip was supposed to be a rogue ability. So what this ability does is on your next weapon swing, it would trip your target, do a little bit of damage, and then award you 1 combo point. What the trip actually did, it never actually said, but I assumed it was some kind of stun for like a second or so. It didn't cost any energy, but the fact that it did give you a combo point is a pretty good indicator that it was supposed to be a rogue ability. And I have a little bit more confirmation to that, as the ability has the exact same icon as the Hunter ability called Wing Clip. And the name of that icon, when you look at it in the game files, is called Ability Rogue Trip, which is a pretty clear indication that it was supposed to be a rogue ability, and it did make it into the game as an NPC ability for 2 mobs in the Hillsbrat Foothills and Silverpine Forest. Kind of like how there's mobs in the game who have the beta Paladin's Crusader Strike. Although there's not too much confirmation in patch notes that rogues had this ability, so it was most likely never actually given to them, and just kind of intended to be given to them. And at number 8, we have Thunderbolt. This was an early Shaman ability with a really unique and kind of overpowered effect, because basically what it does is it literally allows you to throw your weapon at the target for nature damage, interrupt spell casting for 15 seconds, which is like 3 times longer than the average interrupt logout, I might add, and then leave you unarmed the entire time this ability is airborne. Which seems kind of like Earthshock a little bit, in that it does nature damage and interrupts, which is probably why it was never actually given to Shamans. There's also a data mined item called the Tablet of Thunderbolt, which is a class ability item that requires level 32, and has the effect of teaching a Shaman the ability Thunderbolt. So this one has a pretty clear indication of which class it was meant for, and the ability is very similar to Merridin's Stormbolt ability. So it seems like it could have easily been converted into a warrior ability as well, if they just removed the mana cost and made it interact with rage instead. But the ability honestly seemed kind of powerful with that super long interrupt, and Shamans already had Earthshock as a really good interrupt, so they didn't really need Thunderbolt as well. So kind of makes sense why it was never actually added to the game. And also, just a little note, something I found while I was editing this video and putting the pictures together. The icon for Seal of Righteousness ability, which depicts a flying hammer, is known as Thunderbolt in the game files. This seems to be a trend amongst a lot of these abilities in the beta, never actually made into the game. They just reuse the same icon over and over without changing the name of the ability, and just keep whichever ability it was originally given to. And at number 7, we have Shadow Word Befuddle. This was supposed to be a priest ability that when cast on an enemy target would befuddle them for 30 seconds, making their spells cast much slower. So it seems like it was supposed to be a priest version of Curse of Tongues. And the reason I know this was supposed to be a priest ability is the same reason I know Thunderbolt was supposed to be a Shaman ability, as there's a codex in the game files called Codex of Shadow Word Befuddle, which requires a priest class to use and will teach them level 1 Befuddle at level 24. It seems like it would have been neat for priests to also have a Curse of Tongues, but overall, not the biggest loss in the world that they never actually gave it to priests. And at number 6, we have Mind Rot. This is another priest ability, which is very similar to Hunter's Viper Sting, in that it will put a dot on the target, which will drain mana every time it ticks instead of dealing damage. Except Mind Rot seemed to have lasted for 30 seconds, instead of the shorter 8 seconds of Viper Sting. And just like a lot of abilities on this list, the reason I know it's a priest spell is because there's a codex in the game files that teaches this ability to priests at level 38. Now, as to why this was never added to the game, it's probably because priests already have another mana burn ability called Mana Burn, and it's reasonable to assume they didn't want to give priests 2 separate mana burn abilities, especially one in the form of a dot, and then another in the form of a spammable cast. And a little note about the icon for Mind Rot. This icon is more commonly used for the Spell Lock ability that a Warlock's Pet Fellhunter has, and the icon in the game files is still known as Mind Rot. And at number 5, we have Holy Ward. This ability would give you an absorption shield that would only absorb holy damage. Very similar to Shadow Ward, Frost Ward, etc. Lots of casters in Vanilla WoW had damage shields that only worked on one type of magic. Although there was this little distinction about holy damage specifically in Vanilla WoW, in that players could not get resistance to holy damage. It was the only type of damage which existed in the game as its own damaging type, that there was no gear that allowed you to get holy resistance. So it would make sense that they removed Holy Ward to kind of fit in line with the whole holy damage is the only damage that players can't resist mantra. And this was a Warlock ability, seeing as there's an item in the game files called the Grimoire of Holy Ward, which allows Warlocks to train it at level 40. And since Warlocks also had Shadow Ward in Vanilla WoW, it kind of made sense that they would also have Holy Ward as well, seeing as mages had Frost and Fire Ward. But also kind of makes sense that they didn't give it to Warlocks eventually, as this seems kind of weird that a shadow damaging spec would have protection from holy damage. And then in Legion, Holy Ward was added back to the game in the form of a PvP talent for Holy Priests, and it worked nothing like its beta version, and instead kind of worked like Fear Ward, in that you placed it on a friendly target and it would prevent the next CC effect, instead of just a fear like Fear Ward did. So it was added in the game as kind of a completely different ability, just sharing the same name. Which leads me into the next item on this list. And at number 4, we have Seal of Righteousness. Now, this ability did actually make it into Vanilla WoW, but the version that existed in the beta was completely different to what it turned into in the live version of the game. That it's basically a different ability. Because what beta Seal of Righteousness did was give a buff to a weapon for 1 minute, which increased the amount of damage you did to undead targets only. And this ability could be cast on other players, and also had no judgment interaction, because judgment didn't exist in the same form as it did when it went live. So, this was a completely unique ability that Blizzard removed, kept the name, and then created a new ability and gave it this name, as what Seal of Righteousness did in Vanilla WoW was added extra holy damage to your attacks, could not be cast on other players, and dealt holy damage if it was consumed by judgment. So, in the live version of the game, Paladins had 3 abilities that only worked on undeads, but they had 1 more in the beta, making them the ultimate anti-undead playable class. Although it makes sense why they just removed another one of their anti-undead abilities, because abilities that only work on undeads are useless in like 90% of the game. And at number 3, we have Sleep. Funny enough, this ability was given to 2 classes in the beta of WoW, before being changed to basically Hibernate and given to Druids. And what it did was, on a 1.5 second cast time with no cooldown, you could just put an enemy target to sleep for 45 seconds. So, a pretty powerful CC. And it was originally given to priests, as again, there's even a codex in the game files that show that it can be learned by a priest at level 6. But in the beta, they decided to move this ability over to mages, and it worked exactly the same way. And there's even a Tome of Sleep in the game files, as it shows that mages could learn it at level 8. But then in patch 0.8, still in the beta, Sleep was changed into Polymorph for mages, and then Druids were given Hibernate in beta patch 0.12, which is an ability that can put a target to sleep, but only works on beasts and dragons. And at number 2, we have a weird ability called Ethereal Form, which is a 5-minute cooldown ability that makes the user immune to physical damage, but unable to use physical abilities for 10 seconds. So, kind of like a Paladin's Blessing of Protection, full immunity to physical damage, but unable to attack. Or the old school version of it anyway, as I think the current version of Blessing of Protection does allow you to attack while it's on you. Anyways, it seems as if Ethereal Form was supposed to be a Shaman ability, as there's a tablet in the game files called the Tablet of Ethereal Form, and it shows that Shamans could learn this ability at level 24. So it almost seems like the Shaman version of Blessing of Protection, and honestly, thematically, Ethereal Form seems like it makes more sense than Blessing of Protection for the kind of effect it provides with the downsides. Also, something interesting I found out while editing this video, Ethereal Form was added to the game in Legion in the form of a PvP talent for Shamans, and it functions very similar to how it did in the beta. Okay, and at number 1, we're just gonna have a whole bunch of other Shaman abilities, because when I first started making this video, I didn't actually know which classes a lot of these abilities came from, so I just put a lot of the Shaman ones at number 1, because there seemed to be a lot of them at the time, and then it ended up a couple of the other ones earlier on the list also happened to be Shaman abilities, but whatever. So, first up we have Group Astral Recall, which on a 15-minute cooldown will send everyone in the caster's group back to their Hearthstone location. So it's kind of like a mass Hearthstone cast without activating the cooldown of your group's Hearthstones, and seems like an incredibly good ability, as the Hearthstone cooldown was 1 hour long in vanilla. And the ability was never actually given to Shamans, but funny enough, the icon used for this ability is known as Astral Recall Group in the game files, despite the fact that the icon is used for a lot of other things. Next up we have Invisibility Totem, which is a totem you can summon that would give everyone in your group invisibility for 1 minute. Although, based on the wording of this ability, I assume it just worked while you were near the totem and didn't actually let you stay invisible outside of the vicinity of your totem. Now, this ability was never actually added to the game, but another Shaman totem was added later on in the beta called Grace of Air Totem, which uses Invisibility Totem's icon, and in the game files, the icon for Grace of Air Totem is known as Invisibility Totem, which means Invisibility Totem was added to the game files first. Next up we have Shock, or Lightning Shock as it was called later on in the beta, which is very similar to the shock spells that Shamans eventually got in the live version of the game, where they were all instant cast, had a 20-yard range, 6-second cooldown abilities, that shared a 6-second cooldown between them. And they all did something different, whereas Shock has all of these features except it only just does nature damage, and has no indication that it shared a cooldown with other abilities, which leads me to believe this was just the very first iteration of the Shock system they had in the game, and then they removed this one and then added in the 3 Shaman Shocks they eventually got. Or maybe this one was just an extra shock on top of the other 3. And next up we have Lightning Storm, which is an AoE lightning ability that you would cast on a targeted area and then just leave it alone. There are mobs in the game who have an ability very similar to this, and the icon they use for Lightning Storm in the beta is also named Lightning Storm, although I don't think any other players can actually use this icon, so it doesn't really matter like it does for the other ones I mentioned. And lastly, we have Molten Blast, which is a spammable fire-based damaging ability with no cooldown and a lower cast time than Lightning Bolt. And I guess it would make sense why they removed a second castable spell with no cooldown, as the class didn't really need to have 2 of them. And I assume they later incorporated this ability into the Lava Burst ability Shamans eventually got in Wrath of the Lich King. And unlike a lot of these abilities, Molten Blast was actually given to Shamans to test in the beta, and then it got removed in beta patch 0.8. There were 3 additional flying carpet mounts in the Wrath of the Lich King beta that never made it to live for some reason. The first 2, Swift Ebonweed Carpet and Swift Spellfire Carpet, seems to suggest that they were going to be different flying mounts to make for tailoring based on the different kinds of cloth you can make. It should be noted that these 2 mounts are different colors from any other flying carpets in the game. They're not completely unique models, just recolors of existing mounts. I can guess as to why they were scrapped since no official word was ever made. If they got these mounts in addition to the ones that did make it into the game, that would basically force mount collectors at the time to roll tailoring if they wanted more mounts than everyone else. Or maybe they just didn't want one profession to have so many different kinds of mounts to make while others got one or none. There's many different reasons Blizzard could have scrapped them. As for why they scrapped the 3rd one, well, I have no real idea. It's just called Deprecated Swift Flying Carpet and doesn't have a model or picture for it. I can assume it just had another different color and used the same model. It is interesting to note that this mount doesn't actually have a riding skill required to use, only a tailoring and level requirement. I'm pretty sure it's just because the mount was scrapped, but you never know. It could have been planned to be an unskilled mount like the current heirloom motorcycle is. Whatever the case, tailoring already had 4 flying mounts, all with the same model, just with different colors. I doubt tailors are too mad they didn't get 3 additional different colors of the same mount. Next up, we've got the Brewfest Kodo. This Kodo was most likely supposed to be the Horde version of the Brewfest Ram, a mount you could only get during Brewfest as Alliance. But then they decided to revamp Brewfest and add epic versions of the Ram and Kodo to the Brewfest boss, and both Alliance and Horde can use either. One of the few ways for Alliance to ride Kodos and Hordes to ride Rams. Funny enough, even though the regular Brewfest Kodo was never put into the game, its flavor text was updated in Warlords of Draenor to say, you can't remember exactly how you got this mount, Then again, you can't remember much of anything that happens at Brewfest. Not sure why Blizzard decided to add flavor text to a mount that was never implemented. Maybe it'll come out in the future, or maybe an intern just had fun with it, who knows. In Warlords of Draenor, a new Mammoth mount model was added to the game files, but never implemented. The mounts also don't have any animations, they just stay there static, indicating that they were probably scrapped early on in development, but they still show up in game files for whatever reason. It's theorized they were probably Warlords of Draenor repair Mammoth mounts, like how Mr. Pandaria had the Reforge Yak, since we never actually got a new repair mount after Miss, and not even in Legion. It would be nice if a mount with like a banker on it was added, or maybe even an auction house, like they ended up doing in BFA a few years after this video originally went live. In Mr. Pandaria Beta, there were 4 other colors of the Water Strider mounts: the Jade, Orange, Crimson, and Golden Water Striders, and were most likely going to be rep rewards from the Anglers. But instead, they just went with 1 Water Strider and left the other 4 out of the game. Until Warlords of Draenor, that is, when they put the Crimson Water Strider back into the game as a purchasable item from Nat Pagal. So the other 3 colors of Water Striders could be implemented in the future as well, which would have been great because the Water Strider used to be one of the most convenient mounts in the game, and in fact it was so convenient that they took its water walking ability and added it to all mounts basically, and now the Water Strider mounts are not as valuable as they once were when I first made this video. And again, more mounts that appeared in Beta Miss but never went live. This time we've got Riding Cranes. There are 3 different color variations that didn't make it, while all the others did. Noticing a pattern here? Blizzard just loves putting a whole bunch of different color mounts in the game, and only allowing you to get a handful of them. Of the 3 Riding Cranes never actually added, the White Albino Crane did make a brief appearance in the Warlords of Draenor Alpha, meaning that Blizzard was thinking of adding some of their already in the game files mounts available, like they did with the Crimson Water Strider, but then changed their minds. Honestly, I don't really think it's a big deal that these crane mounts weren't put in. They aren't super useful like the Water Striders were, and are just different colors of mounts already in the game, so it's not like we're losing a super unique model with them not being included at the moment. After all, they can always just tack one of these mounts to the end of some random achievement in the future, like they did with the unreleased Heavenly Cloud Serpent mounts. There were 3 unused models for Cloud Serpent mounts in the Mist Beta that weren't added at launch. The Golden Cloud Serpent was later added towards the end of Mist as a vendor item from the Timeless Isle. The Azure Cloud Serpent was added in Worlds of Draenor patch 6.2 as an achievement for collecting 300 mounts. And the Jade Cloud Serpent, the one that looks exactly like Yulon, the August Celestial, and is probably the coolest of all the Cloud Serpents, is still not in the game yet, despite being in the game files since the beta of Mist, and having its own flavor text and everything. The other 2 mounts were added eventually, so maybe the Jade Serpent will be added sometime in the future as well. But, and this is just speculation on my part, the Jade Serpent might not be added for lore reasons, precisely because it looks so much like Yulon. I mean, if they give us Yulon, then they'd have to give us the other Wild Gods as mounts, so it'd be cool to ride around on mounts of Malord and Sonaris as well. Now, onto some non-recolored Mist mounts. The Stormcrow mount was added to the game files sometime in Mist, but no one has seen it yet. It's actually still a pretty big mystery in what happened with this mount. It's in the game, but no one knows how to actually get it, or it might not be in the game and it's just in the game files like the other mounts in this video. It's a mystery mount, that's for sure. There is a battle pet in game with the same model of this mount called Stormwing that is only obtainable by collecting 600 unique pets, which is a decently tough achievement to grind out. So maybe the mount can be tied to some hard to get hidden achievement, or maybe it's a reward from some kind of hidden pet battle feat. Who knows? I'm just guessing wildly, honestly. Blizzard has said there are still hidden things in the game that players haven't found yet, so it's possible this mount could just be one of them. Update: as of Dragonflight, this unique model mount still has not been added to the game yet. Next up on this list, we have Foro's Fabled Steed. This mount was added to the game files in patch 1.6 with the release of Blackwing Lair. It used to be an item that would summon a bronze draked ride and even had the flavor text of "You Wish," but was later changed to an unusable legendary item and its flavor text was removed. It was also the first mount in game to say it was a flying mount in Vanilla WoW, before flying mounts were actually added later on in the Burning Crusade. There are some theories about this mount. One being that it was just a tease to data miners with a "You Wish" flavor text, meaning you wish we'd add this item to the game, or something similar. Another theory is that it's actually just the mount that War Chief Ren Blackhand uses when he flies into the fight. Although I don't know why Blackhand would need an item to use a mount, and the mount he uses is a different color than the mount this item is supposed to summon. But I mean, you never know. Blizzard did use all kinds of weird tricks in Vanilla WoW to make exciting things work. For example, did you know that for some quests that didn't require killing mobs or interacting with objects, like listening to a short story or just going through dialogue options, the game would kill an invisible rabbit to signify that you completed the quest. since quests were hardwired to only be completed by 2 methods that I mentioned previously, or how Onyxia was programmed to fight invisible rabbits and not actual players to give the illusion of actually fighting players. So Rend could have used an item like this in the background to give the illusion of riding a real mount or something, but I doubt it honestly. Next up we've got Peep's Whistle, another legendary mount. This mount is literally just Ashes of Alar and the Phoenix mount that drops in Tempest Keep. Someone did ask a GM about the item and got this response. I understand why you're confused. Basically, you've fallen prey to one of the worst pitfalls of WoW fan sites like Wowhead, PTR data mining. You see, during the development cycle of an expansion or patch, items come and go and developers change their minds more than once. Frostmourne was once going to be a regular item. You can see the unfinished playable version of it in Wowhead. And so was Ashbringer. Eventually, developers decided against both ideas. Peep's Whistle is one of those ideas that was discarded before it got into the game. It was transformed into Ashes of Alar that we all know and love. It's not a Phoenix's Phoenix, nor a GM mount, nor any other rumors you may have heard. So it's a pretty straightforward reason why this mount was never added, as we actually got confirmation for this one. In Alpha WoW, there were quite a few large cat mounts that were never added to live. Most of these mounts were just bigger versions of cat models in game with harnesses put on them. And there were quite a few of these mounts too, but none of them made it to the game. But there were rumors and myths surrounding a few of them in early WoW. And some players were even given some of these cat mounts by mistake in TBC from GMs, before having them taken away after bragging about having them on the forums. But there was one really big rumor about the Bengal Tiger mount that was pretty popular at the time. The Bengal Tiger mount rumor basically stated that you could get the mount in game by doing some wall hopping into Stranglethorn Vale to get to a hidden cave, where a female vendor would sell you the mount. Many people did the wall jumping required to get this cave, but the cave was always just empty. There were rumors that the vendor was on a 1-month respawn timer, or that only one person per realm could buy from it. But no one ever saw her because she never existed. The rumor was most likely just a troll supported with screenshots of the mount from Alpha WoW or a private server. But just like the Ashbringer rumors, it never went anywhere. But also just like the Ashbringer rumors, Blizzard put a nod to the rumors in-game eventually. With a revamp of the old zones, Blizzard added a quest to the game that eventually sends you to this cave and you get a cat pet as a reward. Not exactly a mount, but close enough. Another thing of note about the Bengal Tiger mount, if you look at which races can use it, it includes all the vanilla races except Taurens. This really shows just how early on the alpha this mount was scrapped, since back then, Taurens were going to be given an ability to run as fast as mounts rather than give them an actual mount to ride. But Blizzard eventually decided to scrap the idea and gave Taurens the ability to ride mounts. But not before they scrapped the count mounts though, apparently. Update. In vanilla, Taurens just couldn't really ride anything except for Kodos. And to round off this video, we've got slightly different colored Mechanostriders. There are 3 different colors that aren't in the game, but one of them was in the game for a while and was the rarest mount in the game for quite some time. Out of the 3 mounts, the fluorescent green Mechanostrider was given to a player by mistake, but the player was allowed to keep the mount. When the GMs give you an unattainable item by mistake, they usually just take them away, like the March and Fury shirt or the cat mounts I talked about earlier in the previous post. But it seems pretty recently the mount was finally taken away from the player. No one really knows why it was taken, but it no longer shows up on the player armory like it used to in the past. There are rumors as to why it was taken away, like that he tried to sell his account with the tagline that he had a one-of-a-kind mount on his account and therefore can get a lot of money for it. But anyone can post a fake posting to someone else's account, and there isn't any real evidence that this actually happened, so I wouldn't take this rumor too seriously, even if it is a pretty popular rumor. Water Wings are a pair of gloves that appeared in the game files around the beta for Warlords of Draenor. The cloth gloves have a unique effect of passively increasing your swim speed as well as having an on-use ability to super leap, but only if you're swimming. In the quest that supposedly gives you the gloves, called Elwyn Long Distance Trial 25, details having to hit markers and going through an arc in under 25 Bale tolls, which was probably just a unit of time measurement for this specific trial. The whole thing sounds very similar to the Darkmoon Fairtime trial that has you go around and hit a bunch of markers in under a certain amount of time as well. And since the Darkmoon race came out in the same expansion that this showed up in the game files, it's pretty safe to assume this particular quest was dropped and just implemented into the Darkmoon Fair instead, with the gloves just scrapped as well. It could also be that Blizzard is just hesitant to put any kind of swimming challenges in the game because of the heavy backlash from Vashj'ir, all the way back in Cataclysm. Whatever the case, it's a shame because the gloves seem like a lot of fun. The Dim Torch. This item was originally supposed to be crafted by the scrapped survival profession, which was also supposed to make the campfire. When the profession was scrapped, they simply added the campfire to cooking and scrapped the torch idea. What's interesting about this never implemented torch, as compared to other torches you can get in-game, is that it had a limited duration, mimicking that of what a real-life torch might have, and had a party-wide buff like the campfire does. The campfire has always given a pretty minor buff, and still does to this day, one of the few minor flavor mechanics still in the game. So it's interesting to see that they had plans to put these kinds of minor buffs on other things as well. There's also some speculation that some zones were going to be dark and would require a torch to navigate. If that were the case, then this torch would have also probably been part of that mechanic. And since that mechanic was never implemented, it's a no wonder this torch wasn't either. The Thieven's Kit. This item was most likely just an early version of Thieves' Tools, an item which did make it into the game and was required by rogues in order to use lockpicking or disarm traps. Many classes back in the day required a bunch of items to use their abilities, and rogues were no exception. They needed thieves' tools to do their thieving work, poisons for their weapons, which they had to brew themselves, vanishing powder to use vanish, and blinding powder to use blind. But slowly as time went on, Blizzard removed these requirements one by one, to today where they don't need any special items to do anything, just like pretty much every other class. A convenience for sure, but many argue that it takes away from the fantasy of the class. That, of course, doesn't have anything to do with the Thieven's Kit, since it was never implemented. Indalamar's Holy Hand Grenades. These are two artifact quality items, one with no effect, and the other with the unused effect of blesses all targets with a holy infusion of power, or curses them with the bane of all raiders. Since most artifact quality items are just simply test items, it's no wonder they didn't make it into the game. What they were used to test, though, seems to be a mystery, though it was most likely just a joke item. Blizzard likes to do that sometimes. The grenade's namesake, Indalamar, I don't know if I'm saying that right, comes from the name of a beta tester for Blizzard who showed everyone how overpowered warriors were when everyone cried that they were underpowered, which led to warriors being nerfed almost immediately. But he was then eventually hired by Blizzard to be an itemization developer / specialist because of this. He also has several other items in game with his name spelled backwards, and even has his own TCG card named after him. The item is also most likely a reference to the Holy Grenade from Monty Python, and was even speculated to be needed to kill a Darkmoon rabbit when it was first being introduced, as they both are from the same movie and involved in the same scene. The Iron Bell Spirits. This was a toy item that would simply allow you to throw a mug of Iron Belly spirits at a target to raise their spirits for 1 minute. A novelty item with no real useful effect, just like most toys. The item was supposed to be reward from the quest Raising Spirits in the Townlong Steppes, in which you went around giving beer to Dusklight soldiers. Since the quest was cut from the game, the item it rewarded was never implemented either. The Mysterious Flower. This toy item, with an unknown effect, was supposed to be reward from doing a hidden quest, which was supposed to be unlocked after finding all of the mysterious flowers in all of the zones of Draenor. But all of the flowers were removed at launch, except the one in Talador for some reason. All the way until patch 6.2, you could find the flower in Talador, which would start a fully functional event. The event for all zones were different, with the theme of a mysterious orc coming out and harassing nearby Iron Horde members. The events, flower, and orc are all probably references to the Flower Picker clan, an Easter egg clan from Warcraft 2. According to Wowpedia, the Flower Picker clan was an Easter egg in Warcraft 2, Beyond the Dark Portal. It was the stored name for the Blue Orc, Player 2. The Blue Orc slot was never used in a campaign mission as an active player, so the name never appeared in-game. But the text string for its title still appeared in the game's data files. Since screenshots of the mysterious orc from WoD's beta show it wearing robes with lots of blue colors on it, it's a pretty safe assumption to make that it was a direct reference to the Flower Picker clan Easter egg. Now, as to why it was removed when it seems like most of the events were already working, is a mystery, just like all of the stuff removed from that expansion. Brazi's Gnomish Pleasure Device. This item has the effect of infuses the user with 1000 megavolts of pure gnomish pleasure, and has the flavor text of, if you get caught with this, I don't know you. While the item is not in the game, the NPC who would most likely sell it, called Brazi Gets, is in the game and is a vendor inside ICC, who only sells to Alliance players. One of the items he sells is called Brazzy's Black Book of Secrets, which costs about 22,000 gold, and in it is 5 books, all about advice on dating the women of the different races of the Alliance. He also has dialogue options hinting that he might have some non-legal things for sale, like a pleasure device maybe? It seems all the steps to put the item in the game were there, it's just Blizzard decided not to include it for whatever reason. Knowledge rogue items. There were a series of knowledge rogue item recipes which would teach you how to disguise yourself as various different people and creatures from around the world. It was most likely related to a scrapped disguise mechanic that rogues might have had, since being able to dress up and pretend to be something else is a staple rogue fantasy trope. All of the disguises require some type of cloth, plus a random clothing piece. For example, the Dark Iron Dwarf disguise required wool cloth plus dark iron leather. The Defiance disguise required a red Defiance mask and linen cloth. All the other knowledge pieces went along the same vein. The deprecated Cowardly Flight Potion. This potion used to have the effect of making the person who used it run away from nearby enemies in random directions, similar to how fear makes you run all over the place. In fact, it was basically just a potion that put the fear effect on you. The item was later changed in an unknown patch to just do nothing. It also has a recipe in the game files for alchemists to make the potion, called Recipe, Cowardly Flight Potion. Now, as to why it was never put into the game is a mystery. It's a pretty useless item, so it's not really a big deal. But if you really want to make yourself run around like you're feared, I guess you're out of luck, since these items have been in the game files since vanilla, so it's probably not going to make it to live anytime soon, especially after they removed its effect. Powerful Smelling Salts. This item was a first aid item, which had the effect of bringing a dead player back to life with 15% health and mana. An incredibly useful effect that would have been great for all classes to have and not just healers, and that's probably why it was never implemented. There was another item that was put into the game with a similar effect called the Goblin Jumper Cables. It was an engineering only item that had like a 33% chance to bring a player back to life with low health and mana, just like the Smelling Salts. And Jumper Cables absolutely saw use, even with it being restricted to a major profession and only having a low chance at bringing people back to life. I guess they thought giving everyone better jumper cables would devalue engineering, or it was just too powerful an effect for Blizzard at the time. There was also a recipe for it in the game files, but since the item was never added, neither was a recipe. The Smelling Salts effect was removed from the item's data in an unknown patch, meaning it's probably never going to be in the game. And lastly, one bonus item. The Snurf Gun. This item appeared in the files with Warlords of Draenor's beta, and seemed to be a crafted item with a cosmetic effect of putting some kind of buff on other players. Considering Draenor brought with it a building with tons of random engineering-like items for use in Draenor, plus more fun items like all expansions add for engineering, there are many reasonable places it could have been planned for. The item is an obvious reference to Nerf guns, toy guns that shoot foam darts. So it could have been cool to have a toy like that in WoW for having fake gunfights. To start off, we've got Alex's Ring of Audacity. This GM-only item has been in the game since Vanilla WoW and had an interesting effect. For one, the item is artifact level quality, a quality only ever given to GM items before artifacts were added to the game in Legion, and its original effect gave plus 1000 to defense. Defense was an old stat that would boost your chance to dodge, parry, and be missed by melee attacks by a certain amount. This ring was not unique equip, so it was possible to wear 2 at once. If anyone were to wear 2 of these rings at once, you'd essentially be unhittable by melee attacks. There was some speculation that 2 of these rings were worn for testing purposes against bosses, to see if debuffs and spells were working as intended without having to worry about melee attacks. That explanation seems like a likely explanation to me, seeing as how it was around since vanilla times, and Blizzard had all kinds of weird items in the game files that seemed to serve no purpose other than to test stuff internally. The ring was also a reference to one of the ex-directors. He was once the leader of a famous guild in EverQuest, and his first character was the first level 50 character in that game. His guild also went on to acquire many world first achievements in EverQuest, and when he transitioned over to WoW, he was asked not to get the world first kill in Onyxia because people might accuse him of having inside knowledge since he worked for Blizzard. The original text on this ring reads, "Consider yourself born again, hardcore." I don't really get what this is a reference to, but the ex-developer who this is based on was a hardcore player, so it's probably a reference to one of the things he accomplished. When the defense stat was removed from the game, the ring was changed as well to no longer have stats, and its flavor text was changed as well to "looks great, less filling." Blizzard has a habit of changing or adding flavor text to items not put in the game. Next up, Onyxia Scale Breastplate. This item suggests there was probably more things planned with the vanilla item Scale of Onyxia, since it also has a pattern in the game files that requires 12 of them as part of the mats to make the breastplate. But the pattern was never put into the game either, seeing as the armor wasn't. The Scale of Onyxia was eventually only used to create one item, a cloak that was almost required by tanks to wear since it negated the damage of a very hard-hitting dot and Blackwing layer. There were also two different versions of the Scale of Onyxia in the game files, Refined Scale of Onyxia and Charged Scale of Onyxia, further indicating that Blizzard had all kinds of plans for Scales of Onyxia and just abandoned them all halfway through, but not before programming some of them into the game. So this next item is a shirt with an interesting effect. The item is called War Paint Shirt Not Good for the Ladies, NYI, which when worn by a male character gives them tattoos on their chest, back, and arms, which is a pretty neat idea for a shirt. When worn by female characters, the tattoos go over the bra, which doesn't look very natural. I guess that's why it says "not good for the ladies" in its item name. Currently, I think the only way to get tattoos is to play a demon hunter, so shirts that give tattoos seems like a neat idea that Blizzard was playing around with. This next item is another shirt called Super Girly Shirt, which is just a cut-up striped t-shirt that shows the midriff. There were a lot more risque pieces of armor in the game than this shirt, so it's kind of a mystery why it was never added. It does look very similar to the shirt that female goblin survivors wear in the Goblin Starting Zone, so maybe it's just an NPC-only item. Next up, we've got the Game Master armor, specifically 3 pieces of gear, the GM hood, robe, and slippers. When GMs used to interact with players in-game, they could be seen wearing these items, but GMs could pretty much wear whatever they wanted, so I assumed the GM armor was just the default armor given to GM characters, and they were free to modify them however they wanted. So the GM armor was technically in the game, but never made available to non-GM characters for obvious reasons. The next item in this video is a ring called Ring of Uber Resist Test. Now, this item is very obviously a test item, seeing as it has test in its name. The item is also an artifact quality like a lot of the other test items, and it just has plus 315 to all resistances, the highest amount on any single piece of gear. But there have been temporary effects that could give you higher resistances, like the Trinket from Tol Barad. What's interesting about this item is that when resistances were removed from the game in Miss, this item remained unchanged, along with a handful of vanilla items. Blizzard is not shy about changing stats on test items, so it seems Blizzard doesn't really use this item anymore, or they still use it to test certain things. Since while resistances were removed from almost all items and abilities, they still are in the game and still work. So I guess it's not fair to say Blizzard removed resistances completely in Myths, and rather Blizzard removed like 90% of things related to resistances, and just made it a rare thing, and an inconsequential thing. Alright, and for the next 4 items in this video, they don't really have much story behind why they were never implemented, like the other items on this list, so I'll just showcase them all real quick to end off the video. The Mage Dragon Robe. It's a cloth robe that gave strength, never added for unknown reasons. It's speculated that maybe it was a reward from the old Tremors of the Earth, or Broken Alliance quest, which required you to fight black dragons and was turned into the Kirin Tor. But there was no real proof of that. It's just one of the few items that had both mages and dragons in it. Burning Obsidian Band, an uncommon quality level 50 ring that gave stamina, but strangely it has no sell price. Mainly holiday items or special event items don't have sell prices, so it could have probably been set to be a part of an event of some sort. The Scorched Bands are cloth bracers with nothing special of note. They're just green bracers with the same model as 2 other obtainable bracers in game, and have normal stats for an item of its level. And finally, Pirate's Patch Test. This item is a black eye patch, with the same model as 3 other eye patches that can be obtained in game. Since it does have test in its name, it's obviously just a test item. But testing for what? To see what characters look like with one eye patch? That's the only thing I can think of, or maybe it's the item used for NPCs with eye patches or something else. What's interesting about this item is that it uses a shield for its item icon, so maybe it's supposed to shield your eye or something? First up, we've got the Son of Gordo. Now, this is an interesting pet. You see, it was added to the game in the Alpha build of Legion and dropped from a rare elite mob. This pet had its moveset, model, and item to summon the pet all in the game and working just fine. So what happened? Well, the mob that dropped this pet was removed from the game, and Blizzard just never bothered to move this pet to drop somewhere else. It's that simple. The pet's moveset isn't very good and very standard for rhino-like pets. Its breed is literally the worst one too, so it's not like anything was lost with its non-inclusion. Other than the fact that there are no other battle pets with its model, so if you really wanted one of these weird ram-moose hybrid animals as a companion, well, you're out of luck. Next up, we've got some turtle eggs. Ever since Vanilla WoW, there have been 5 different turtle eggs in the game files associated with 5 different turtle pets. But for one reason or another, none of them were added. Vanilla WoW had its fair share of hard-to-get pets, and even running around with the parrot you could buy in Booty Bay for 50 silver would cause people to stop you to look at it, since information wasn't so vast in those dark times, and not everyone knew that you could have a little non-combat pet follow you around. The problem with pets in Vanilla was that they took up bag space to summon and dismiss, but hardcore pet collectors dedicated all of their bag and bank space to collecting pets anyway, so I doubt adding 5 more to the mix would have bothered them all too much. In the Wrath of the Lich King open beta, players could loot an item called Certificate of Appreciation from bosses that didn't have their loot optimized yet. Once a player got 40 certificates, they could turn them in for a pet called XS001 Constructor Bot, which had a completely new and unique character model. This was just meant as a fun way to deal with not adding loot to the beta yet. But once Wrath went live, the pet disappeared, never to be seen again, until the pet store opened up and sold a little XT who had the same model as this pet. And a little while after that, another pet with a similar appearance called Landro's Little XT was added to the game as a TCG loot pet. So with 2 different pets in the game with the same model, I doubt XS001 Constructor Bot will ever be added. Also in the Wrath beta, a pet called Baby Shark was available from Wintergrass with the flavor text of, "He really requires water." This baby shark would just float behind the player in the air, despite it sounding like it would be an underwater only pet. The pet was removed from the game once Wrath went live and was never seen again. Blizzard was asked in an interview if the baby shark would ever be re-added to the game, to which they confirmed that he would indeed. A couple of years later in Warlords of Draenor, a new pet was added to the game called Land Shark, who had the same model as Baby Shark, only with a little bubble of water surrounding it. With the inclusion of Land Shark to the game, it's highly unlikely that Baby Shark will ever be added. Lizzie the Lizard, a pet that's an obvious reference to the Magic School Bus, where the teacher in the show had a pet iguana named Lizzie. The pet showed up in the game files around Cataclysm's beta, but was never actually added. There is some speculation that this pet was going to be a rare chance drop pet similar to Mr. Grubbs, because its item ID is very close to Grubbs, and they both have the exact same sell price. And another pet simply called Bubbles, who was literally just a bubble, which I might interject here to say is a really cool idea for a pet, and I wish it was put into the game. But I think they just use this bubble model for underwater pets like the land shark or the purple puffer. But anyways, Bubbles was added to the game files around the same time as the other 2 pets, and it also has an item ID close to Mr. Grubbs. In fact, it's even closer to Mr. Grubbs than Lizzie is, and it has the same sell price as the other 2 pets as well, meaning it too was probably going to be a rare chance drop pet, but way cooler, added around the same time, but scrapped for whatever reason. And it's doubtful the bubble will ever be added since it's just used with the aquatic pets now. And the lizard model is the same as all the other lizard models, so there's no real loss with the uninclusion of Lizzie. Now, these next pets don't actually have any items that are associated to summoning them, only the spells themselves. These 3 elemental pets, Rumbling Rockling, Swirling Stormling, and Whirling Waveling, appear in the game files around the beta of Cataclysm, but never made it into the game, which makes sense as Cataclysm was a very elemental focused expansion. The models for the 3 pets do exist in the game as other pets, so I assume these 3 were just ideas for elemental pets as rewards for something that were just scrapped. Next up, we've got the Pet Fish pet. This pet was just a dead fish. You'd use the item and it'd summon a dead fish who would just lay on the floor. The tooltip for this pet reads, "Summon your pet fish. He used to look healthier, ... It's obviously just a joke pet that they removed. I think this was back when Blizzard hadn't thought of the idea to just put fish in bubbles to allow players to walk around with aquatic pets. And this pet was probably a meta joke on why you couldn't have a fish as a companion pet in WoW. But maybe they started having eventual plans to make the aquatic pets in the future, and they scrapped this pet since the joke would be made irrelevant by themselves down the road. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into this, and the real reason it was just added for a way less complicated reason. There was also a pet rock added to the game files around the same time as this pet, but it was removed as well. But then the pet rock was reintroduced later on anyway, but still no dead fish pet. The next never added pet is called Crafty. There's a legendary fishing pole that was never added to the game called Crafty's Pole, indicating that Crafty is probably some kind of in-joke by developers for things that will never be added to the game. Or maybe it's in reference to the fishing trophy called Old Crafty, and one of the developers just really likes the idea for some reason. Anyways, what's interesting about this pet is that it has a whole set of pet battle moves programmed, as well as stats and flavor text reading, likely to flip out and kill someone, and is noted to be dropped from developers. Its character model is just that of the Pandaren monk pet from the pet store, and all of its abilities are, well, pretty weird. For those of you who don't know, I used to run a pet battle channel where I largely focused on PvP pet battle content and other stuff. That is to say, I know a ton more about pet battles than the average person, and what skill sets pets usually have. For a humanoid pet, Crafty only has one move that's used regularly by other humanoid pets. All of his other abilities are very random. The ability Prot Strike is almost exclusively used by dragons. Baneling Burst is used by only one pet in the game called the Baneling, which is a StarCraft 2 promotional pet for Collector's Edition. Its other moves are pretty generic and are used by many different pet family types, but those two in particular stand out as just really random. This pet is obviously just a big in-joke, probably aimed at data miners or something, and I'm about 99% certain will never be added to the game. Next up we have the Hard-Boiled Egg. This pet is just a baby Murloc with no real special story behind it. There are many other Murloc pets already in the game, and most of them are promotional pets, with I think only one of them being obtainable in the game by finding its secret egg. And interesting thing to note about Hard-Boiled Egg is that using the ability has a spell ID of Eat the Egg, which is pretty weird. I guess this pet was supposed to be a Murloc pet that popped out of the egg as you tried to eat it or something. And last but not least, we've got little Alexstrasza. This pet was planned to be a mini version of Alexstrasza, similar to how little Ragnaros and little Deathwing have their own mini versions in game. But the idea was scrapped during Cataclysm's beta build before she ever got a unique model. Funny enough, during the Celestial Tournament, Wrathion uses 3 mini versions of dragons in his team called Cindy, Alex, and Dada. Cindy uses the same model as the Frosty pet given out as part of the Wrath of Lich King's Collector's Edition, and Dada uses the same model as Little Deathwing from Cataclysm's Collector's Edition, and Alex just uses a generic Red Dragon Whelpling model. If a model for Little Alexstrasza existed, I'm pretty sure it would have been used here, since Alex is obviously a reference to Alexstrasza, just like how Cindy is obviously Sindragosa, and Dada is Deathwing. First up, we've got Frostmourne. This was actually in the game files since WoW's launch, but was never shown in-game until the Wrath of the Lich King expansion in 2008, with the official lore behind the weapon being that it was destroyed by Tyrion. It's very unlikely to ever be obtainable by players, especially since Frost Death Knights take the remains of the Broken Sword to make their artifact weapons. The sword in the game files is the only weapon in the game with a meta socket on it. For those of you who probably don't remember, meta sockets were only ever on helms and could only be socketed with special meta gems which were stronger than normal gems, but they don't appear on any pieces of gear anymore from Warlords of Draenor onwards. The weapon also gives you a Lich King buff, presumably changing your armor to that of the Lich King's, or maybe would actually turn you into the Lich King, making you hostile to everyone until you were killed by your friends. Maybe it would even delete your character once you died, since the weapon in lore does consume your soul. That's probably why it was never made available to players, and totally not because it was the most iconic weapon in the game wielded by the most popular villain ever. And also these were just real rumors at the time about why this wasn't added to the game. The next weapon, called Shard of the Defiler, is a legendary dagger. It supposedly has the ability to turn your character model into a demon and gives it a passive 15% melee attack speed boost and crit chance. When it was first data mined in Vanilla WoW, it also did some of its melee damage as shadow damage, which would have been really interesting because, as far as I know, there has never been a melee weapon in the game that has done magical damage. There was once a quest item dagger in the beta version of the Burning Crusade that did arcane damage instead of physical, and mages in the beta were able to get it to insane levels of damage, making battle mages a real and overpowered thing. But that never made it to live, and neither did this dagger. Some speculation of the dagger was that it was just supposed to be part of the original Hyjal raid from Vanilla WoW, not the Battle for Mount Hyjal raid added in BC. For those of you who don't know, the zone of Hyjal was blocked off all the way until Cataclysm when it was turned into a leveling zone. And there are rumors that Blizzard had plans for some kind of raid there. While the zone was not accessible to players, it was fully textured and even had the skeleton of Archimonde on the tree for a while. A lot of effort was put into the zone, but it was never used for anything. And this dagger might have been a reward from a scrap zone, seeing as its name can be traced back to Archimonde and it gave a demon appearance. Next up, we've got Thunderfury Blessed Blade of the Windseeker, deprecated. Now, Thunderfury Blessed Blade of the Windseeker is a legendary very much in the game, but this weapon, Thunderfury Blessed Blade of the Windseeker deprecated, has the same stats as the regular Thunderfury, just without the chance on hit effect, or any model data. But what's interesting about Thunderfury Blessed Blade of the Windseeker deprecated is that it has always required you to be level 100 to equip it. Way back, years ago before Warlords of Draenor was even thought of in the developer's mind, and the max level was still 60. Most of the weapons in this video will either not have a weapon requirement, or have one appropriate for the time the weapon was added to the game. Thunderfury Blessed Blade of the Windseeker deprecated is probably the first weapon ever put into the game files that had a level requirement of 100. The next weapon in this video is actually a fishing pole. Crafty's pole is the only legendary fishing pole in the game files. It only requires a level 1 in fishing to use, and gives you a 1000 skill increase in fishing. The pole was most likely used to test fishing, and probably still is to some extent today. The fishing pole has flavor text that says, "Just holding this fishing pole makes you shiver with excitement." This is possibly the most amazing thing you've ever seen. Most items not made available to players don't have any kind of flavor text. In fact, most items in game don't have flavor text either. There's also an offhanded game that you can catch by fishing Orgrimmar called Old Crafty, with a flavor text said to be the craftiest fish in Orgrimmar. It appears he was outsmarted at last. Funny enough, there was a bug for a while that wouldn't allow players to actually loot Old Crafty when he was caught, making it a very elusive to catch fish indeed. Data mined in vanilla, the original Twin Blades of Azzinoth followed lore a lot more closely than the Warglaives that did make it into the game and drop from Illidan did. The Twin Blades were a weapon that had an on-use effect, which would split the weapon into two separate weapons, called the Warglaive of Azzinoth right and left. Its equip effect was pretty similar to the effect of the Warglaives in the game, extra melee haste and bonus damage when fighting demons. These never added Warglaives also have the same model as the Warglaives the Demon Hunter on the box art for Vanilla WoW is using, maybe indicating they were going to be added sometime in Vanilla WoW, but were scrapped and replaced with two separate legendary weapons with better graphics that drop from Illidan and Black Temple. The Fudge Hammer is a legendary weapon that appeared in early alpha builds for Warlords of Draenor. Its flavor text reads, "Legendary weapon of Warlord Blackhand." Legendary status derived from its name, not its power. The hammer is obviously a joke item either put in the game to mess with data miners or for testing, but I'm not sure what kind of testing could be done with the Fudge Hammer. It's not like it has amazing stats or anything, and its only effect is give to +2 attack power, which is a pretty insignificant amount of attack power, so I'm pretty sure it's just a joke. Blizzard likes to put some stuff in the game file sometimes, literally just to mess with data miners. Next up, we've got a Troll Guitar. This weapon is a unique model guitar used by the troll in the band that plays during the Darkmoon Fair. The effect of the weapon is to make your character appear to play the guitar. There are 2 other guitars in the game which were available to players at one point in time, and are used by other NPCs during the concert in the Darkmoon Fair. But for some reason, the troll guitar was never made available for whatever reason. So now, if you want your character in-game to look like he's playing a guitar, you better get lucky and grab either the Blood Elf guitar or the Arcanite Ripper off the Black Market Auction House, or play an undead. During the Argent Crusade daily quest, you had to equip a lance and then mount one of the many racial mounts available to you, and then go off an amazing mounted combat that 90% of the WoW community hated. But did you know, Blizzard had intended to include specific racial lances as well? The idea was scrapped pretty early though, as Blizzard only finished 5 of them before stopping that stuff, and just making faction-specific lances. The ones they did make were the Draenei, Gnome, Dwarf, Human, and Troll lances. Next up we have another joke weapon, probably used for testing, called Teagle's Trashbringer. This weapon was added in the Wrath of Lich King Alpha and given to Death Knights with their talents. Tiggle was the username of WoW's raid designer at the time, and the weapon had the flavor text, "Trash getting you down," in addition to using the weapon model of the Ashbringer itself. The weapon did terrible damage and only vendored from 1 copper. Funny enough, its item quality was upgraded to artifact quality with Legion, which probably had something to do with the Ashbringer finally being added to the game for reals. I should probably mention here as well that the Ashbringer was itself a weapon that was in the game since Vanilla WoW, but never added, and had all kinds of rumors and speculations on how to get it that Blizzard referenced with its hidden skin requirement. I'd normally go into more details about this item, but I've already covered its existence in detail in other videos of mine, and it's a super well-known weapon that's famous for never being added. And now onto the last one, Martin's Broken Staff. Originally called Martin Thunder. It was a GM item that had no weapon type, so it could be equipped by all classes, gave 100 resistances to 4 different elements, and had an on-use effect to instantly kill all enemies within 30 yards. It was one of the few artifact quality weapons in the game files, which was a thing always in the game since launch, but never made available to players until Legion. The weapon was changed in patch 3.3 to Martin's Broken Staff, a poor quality weapon with most of the same stats, but with its effect now reading, the caster commits no longer alive and no longer lives. This change to the item was made a short time after the whole Martin Fury fiasco. Martin Fury was a shirt item with the effect to instantly kill everyone within 30 yards, just like Martin Thunder, only it had a limited amount of charges. A player was given the shirt by mistake from a GM, and then the guy gave it to another guild member who then used it 14 times to one-shot raid bosses, giving them record kill times and even a few Realm First achievements. When Blizzard found out, they banned everyone who was in the guy's guild for 24 hours, and then banned the player who used the shirt permanently. They then changed the shirt to poor quality and changed its effect to instantly kill the player instead, rather than everything around them. This change was most likely made just in case it was given to another player by mistake, and the change was also brought over to the GM item Martin Thunder, which was then renamed to Martin's Broken Staff. Now, if you play a Ret Paladin in Vanilla WoW, and if you're not fighting an undead, you only have 1 damaging ability, until the target goes below 20% health anyway, in which case you'll gain access to a second damaging ability. The way red pallies do most of their damage is through their seal system, which buffs their auto attacks and does different things depending if you consume it with your judgment ability, which is their only damaging move, which requires you to have a seal active in order for it to work. So basically, a red paladin's DPS revolves around activating a seal, using judgment to consume that seal to do its unique effect, and then reapplying another seal to buff your auto attack damage while you wait for judgment to come off cooldown. And that's basically how red paladins played. They just waited around for judgment to come off cooldown, as they couldn't really do anything else damage-wise, unless they also wanted to use their AoE ability on single target, or if they were fighting undead, in which case they gain access to 2 new abilities called Exorcism and Holy Wrath. Now, this may surprise you to hear, but this version of the Ret Paladin wasn't added to the game until 2 weeks before the game went live. So basically, completely untested and added in at the last second. Because during the beta, Ret Paladins had a little bit more to do than just activate a seal and use Judgment. Ret Paladins had 2 more damaging abilities called Crusader Strike and Holy Strike. Holy Strike was basically the Paladin version of the warrior ability Heroic Strike, where it would turn your next weapon swing into a harder hitting attack. But Holy Strike turned all that damage into pure holy damage, which meant it bypassed armor and was actually really good. And Crusader Strike is an ability Paladins have in the live version of the game, and they basically have had the ability ever since it was given back to them at the beginning of the Burning Crusade. And what Crusader Strike did in WoW's beta was it would do instant damage and then put a debuff on the target, which would increase the holy damage they took for the next 30 seconds. And this debuff would stack up to 5 times. And Crusader Strike did not have a cooldown. So Paladins actually had a spammable damaging move, as well as a decent holy damage ability on a 10-second cooldown with Holy Strike, which would hit harder the more stacks of Crusader Strike you had up on the target. And this version of the Paladin in the beta was actually pretty good, and did decent damage, unlike how a baseline Ret Paladin played in Classic WoW, where they were one of the lowest DPS classes in the game. So, why did Blizzard remove Crusader Strike and Holy Strike, and then basically give them nothing to replace their only damaging abilities? Well, there are some theories and rumors about this, and I plan on going over both of them. First up, mechanically speaking, these 2 abilities were removed from the game because they just made the Paladin go incredibly quickly. Both Crusader Strike and Holy Strike cost mana to use, and caster classes in vanilla WoW had to worry about their mana. So they had to be careful about which abilities they could spam before running out of mana. And while Paladins did good damage with these 2 abilities, having a spammable Crusader Strike caused them to run out of mana a little bit too quickly, and the vanilla WoW class design was absolutely not about making the mana cost lower, as there were a couple of other classes in the game who were unviable because they also had so much mana problems. So many people theorize the reason they converted Ret Paladins into the auto attack version they got for vanilla WoW was a band-aid way of solving the mana issue that Crusader Strike brought up. If the Paladin only needs to use 1 ability every 8 seconds in order to do damage, then they don't have to worry about mana as much for their DPS. Regardless of the fact that this promoted a style of gameplay which wasn't as fun as what Crusader Strike and Holy Strike might have brought about. And there was also the debuff limit. Vanilla WoW only had an 8 debuff slot limit, which was later increased to 16, which is what we have at the start of Classic WoW. And if the Paladin's main damaging ability, Crusader Strike, required them to take up one of these debuff slots, then Paladins wouldn't be able to use their main damaging ability in raids anyway, and they'd be stuck with only Holy Strike every 10 seconds. Because in beta, when Paladins had both Crusader Strike and Holy Strike, Judgment and Seals didn't really exist in the way they did in vanilla WoW. Beta Judgment was literally just Holy Wrath, where it was an AoE that only worked on undeads. And when they changed the Paladin class to how it eventually worked in vanilla WoW, they changed Judgment into the 8-second cooldown ability, which consumed Seals in order to do damage. And then they just added in Holy Wrath, which had Judgment's old effect. And the Seal system was completely added to the game along with this Judgment change, where the Seal system in vanilla WoW requires you to activate a short-term buff on yourself, which is usually about 30 seconds, and then you consume that 30-second buff with your Judgment in order to do damage, and other various effects. And while that 30-second buff is on you, it gives you an auto attack buff, which does various things depending on which seal you're using. And the things in beta WoW, which were called seals, were just changed into the blessings, which is kind of confusing to explain in this video, but to make it as simple as possible, they completely created the seal mechanic from scratch at the start of Vanilla WoW, and then for some reason gave it a naming convention after another set of abilities that Paladins already had, that functions nothing like how the seal mechanic works. Anyways, since they didn't have the seal and judgment mechanic alongside Crusader Strike and Holy Strike, they never really got to test how that would function for the class, allowing them to have 3 damaging abilities that they would then use regularly along with the auto attack buff from seals. Considering that system would still have the mana problems and the debuff slot limit problem, I can see why they decided to simplify things for themselves and just give them the auto attack thing instead, so that Paladins could focus on being buff bots. You see, Paladin buffs were really good, but they only lasted for 5 minutes, and you can only place one on a person at a time. So having a Paladin in your raid meant everyone else in your raid could do more damage and healing, but that also meant the Paladin spent most of their global cooldowns just buffing everyone else, making them one of the only pure support classes to exist in the game, which could be another big reason why they were changed to focus on auto attacks instead of having an active rotation with Crusader Strike, because they wanted the Paladin to use those global cooldowns on buffing the raid instead of using them on damaging moves. Of course, the seal mechanic wasn't a huge success either, as it was all but removed after Vanilla WoW since, while it did have a few fans, it wasn't very good, and I'm sure everyone probably would have liked it more if it just did a little bit more damage or, was a little bit more involved than having to press 2 buttons every 8 seconds. So, if you go back and watch any beta footage of World of Warcraft that has Paladins in it, you can actually see Crusader Strike on the debuff bar of the video I'm showing right now, as a Shaman is going out and fighting a Paladin in the open world, and you can see the Crusader Strike debuff on him as he's killing the higher level Paladin. But Vanilla WoW was already taking a long time to come out. It was in development for 5 years before they launched, so they started just rushing things towards the end, but it's kind of a wonder why they decided to make such a drastic change to the Paladin class 2 weeks before the game launched, which kind of segues into this next section of the video. Now, outside of the mechanical reasons that people theorize, these aren't, confirmed in any way, about why they removed Crusader Strike and Holy Strike, there's also the rumors of 2 game developers joining around the same time the seal system was added. 2 famous EverQuest players named Furor and Tiggle joined the WoW development team at around the time Paladins got this drastic change to their damaging rotation. And the change to the Paladin class was so last second that even in the official Vanilla WoW guide, which was sold in stores, they featured the Paladin old class systems, including Crusader Strike, Holy Strike, and calling their blessings seals. And you see, these 2 players were infamous for absolutely hating hybrid classes, to the point where they would stage protests in-game whenever they found out a hybrid class was doing anything except being a buff bot, or something like that. They just really didn't like the fact that a hybrid class could do as much damage as a pure DPS class, and they were well known for wanting hybrid classes to basically be terrible as a tax for being able to do a whole bunch of different things, which would make sense why Paladins lost their fun rotation as soon as they joined and were given the infamous seal system for Vanilla WoW. Although I'd call these just rumors instead of what actually happened, because there isn't confirmation this is why it happened. And in fact, Ghostcrawler is largely credited with changing Paladins to how they were in Vanilla WoW, and Ghostcrawler is also the person who wanted hybrid classes to perform just as well as pure DPS classes. So what probably happened was Ghostcrawler just wanted to try out this change with the Paladins and see how it worked. Saw that it failed in Vanilla WoW, and then changed his philosophy going forward to try to push all classes to basically being equal. So, all that being said, there's not too much credit to the Furor or Tiggle changing Vanilla WoW Paladins into a garbage spec, although this wouldn't be a video about beta ret Paladins without mentioning this very famous rumor. I just couldn't find any confirmation for any of these rumors besides lots of speculations on forums and stuff, which is usually the case for very famous WoW rumors. So, there you have it. The reason Paladins only had 1 damaging ability was because it was given to them at the last second without any kind of testing like all the other classes got, as well as a whole bunch of rumors and theories as to why they made this decision in the first place. After Vanilla WoW, Blizzard changed Paladins to no longer be buff bots. They allowed them to actually tank, and gave them competitive DPS. Arguably, it was much better than it was in Vanilla WoW though. First up, let's go with an unknown NPC. Located on a small tip of land just east of the Firewing Point in the Terracar Forest is an NPC named David Wayne. Unless you have the quest chain which would send you to him, then he simply has a couple of dialogue options, which basically state that he was part of the Sons of Lothar, and then decided to head on his own as he thought he should be part of something larger. If you do his quest chain, it's a very long series of events which send you into 4 separate dungeons to collect items, which will eventually culminate in creating a weapon that has a lot of extra attack power when fighting against demons. And the stats on the weapon are about equivalent to an epic quality item when fighting demons, despite the fact that all of the weapons are of blue quality. Although, with how many dungeons you have to run in order to forge the weapon, there's a good chance you would have found a better weapon by the time you've completed the quest chain. So it was never a necessary thing to do, or even really that good once you got to the content that involved killing demons in the Burning Crusade. And there's a Hearthstone card called the Master Swordsmith, which shows David Wayne crafting the demonic blade in its artwork. Now, here's what's notable about this NPC. He was theorized to be the second son of Alexandros Morgraine. In Vanilla WoW, there were some pieces of lore that stated that the second son of Alexandros was living in the Outland, and would be able to reform the Ashbringer. Because remember, they had originally planned on giving players the Ashbringer in Vanilla WoW before changing their mind. So, there was a lot of groundwork laid for the eventual reveal of the Ashbringer that they eventually abandoned and never did anything with until Legion. So, players speculated that this master blacksmith, who helped to create weapons that are really good against demons, was the most likely candidate to be the second son of the previous wielder of the Ashbringer, based on those rumors. However, once Wrath of the Lich King came out, it was revealed that Darion Morgraine was actually the second son, and we meet him immediately upon doing the Death Knight intro scenario. Now, let's look over the hidden story of Caretaker Delandris. Located near Honorhold is an NPC who tends the gravestones, which many Alliance players will be familiar with if they've ever died in the Outlands. There are no quests that send you to Caretaker Delandris, and there's no special lore associated to him either. He just simply walks around the gravestones, and occasionally will place flowers on top of them. If you go up and talk to him, he'll tell you that he was actually born in Outlands, and as a boy, he always dreamed about going back to his homeland of Azeroth, and had heard all kinds of stories about how much nicer it was, with actual grass, oceans, and big blue skies. Unfortunately, both of his parents passed away when he was young, and as he grew up, he joined the Sons of Lothar, and took it upon himself to take care of his parents' gravestones, as well as all the others from the family members lost at Honorhold. And he laments that he no longer wishes to leave this place, as it's his duty to take care of this one little job, as there's even piles of gravestones nearby waiting to be used, as Outlands is a pretty dangerous place. Now, there's nothing really else known about Caretaker Delandris. There's not even really a reason to talk to him. He was basically put in by Blizzard in order to fill out the world more, and there's lots of NPCs like this, which is one of the joys at looking at the unknown side of WoW. And now for some information about the earliest versions of the game. Did you know Paladins did not have a taunt in Vanilla WoW at all? And the reason they didn't have a taunt is actually kind of funny. Some Blizzard class designers from the time said they intended for the Protection Paladin to have the ability to tank, but they were afraid that it would be too powerful. You see, Paladins were kind of rushed out in WoW's launch, as they had a whole bunch of reworks right as the game went live and they had no time to actually test any of them. So Paladins were kind of infamous for being incredibly weak on the damage front. But even with this, they thought Paladins were going to be too strong because they could heal themselves. And they said that the biggest reason they didn't give them a taunt is because they thought a Paladin would just tank everything and then heal themselves up, and they would be too overpowered. Once they saw players in raids though, they knew this wasn't actually a concern at all. That's why the Burning Crusade, they gave them the ever so important taunt abilities, and even allowed them to have the niche of being the AoE tank, which made Paladins one of the best tanks to have for dungeon runs. It's kind of funny that they thought having the ability to heal would make them too good as a tank. But really, that cast time on healing made it not really a viable thing to do at all, and a Paladin wouldn't heal themselves unless it was an instant cast, or they had some way to bubble or literally crowd control an entire group of mobs first, as you can't use any of your passive mitigation while casting either, which means you take extra damage while channeling or casting abilities because you can't dodge, parry, or block. And now, let's take a look at a forgotten and named NPC. Located in the southern portion of the Hellfire Peninsula, walking back and forth on a broken bridge segment that is not accessible until you get a flying mount, is an NPC named Boss Nekrog. It's just a lone fell orc that walks back and forth. Doesn't have any dialogues or quests associated to him, his name isn't a reference to anything, and he's not important to lore. However, he did have a quest associated to him in the Burning Crusades beta. There was actually a whole quest chain surrounding this area, and a couple of the quests in that 10 quest long chain directly involved interacting with Boss Nekrog. Basically, he was a leader of some of the fell orcs in the area, and had taken a scout captive. So what you were supposed to do was build a bomb and use it in order to get his attention, which would cause him to climb down from the bridge in order to investigate, which then would allow you to attack him in order to recover the key necessary to free the scout. And seeing as there were Horde and Alliance versions of this quest chain, it's kind of a wonder why they removed it from the live version of the game. It could be because the lore is kind of spotty. Boss Nekrog is said to be a commander of some of the fell orcs in the area, even though they all work under the Shattered Hand clan in Kargath Bladefist. Or it could be because the quest was kind of complicated. In order to obtain the quest line, you had to find a random item and then use a bomb when the NPC was close to the area, since it did patrol back and forth, which maybe caused some pathing issues with having to climb down from an inaccessible vantage point from really high up. He's like 50 yards in the air. Or it could be any number of reasons. We don't actually know why it was removed. Just that when it was removed, they left the named NPC in the game, still walking in his pathing location. It probably even still has the programming from the quest on the NPC. But since there's no way to trigger it, it's relegated to lost and forgotten status. Kind of out of the way too for people to even notice him, and not an NPC you can even fight until higher levels when you unlock flying, when he's no longer even a challenge. And now for the hidden side of WoW. Located on the southern edge of the Hellfire Peninsula is an object called the Jar of Ashes right in front of a skeleton. The skeleton is commonly called the Hellfire Peon in the WoW community, and if you click on the Jar of Ashes in front of him, you'll get a bit of flavor text, which reads, "Here is a jar of ashes. These are the ashes of my sanity, my passion, and my drive, all utterly destroyed by themselves. May all those who look upon these desolated lands of Hellfire remember this fallen peon. He shed blood for the Alliance and sacrificed for the Horde, only to be driven utterly mad by the wicked and soulless ones who devoured what he held most dear. As they feast from his toils, may they suffer his wrath. Maybe not in this world, but in every world hereafter. It is my declaration, my solemn oath, and my everlasting promise. I will avenge my suffering." Now, this little piece of flavor text doesn't really relate to anything specific in lore, and it's just another piece of flavor added to give more personality to the zone that you can discover, as this little jar is located way out of the way, and while it is accessible to players without flying mounts, it's hard-pressed to actually go to this location accidentally. So it's just a nice little Easter egg of someone in Hellfire Peninsula who probably died in some terrible way that made him just hate the world and write a very lengthy, passionate letter. There is some speculation about what this could be relating to, though. Shortly before the Burning Crusade launched, a CM on the WoW forums left the company after going on a bit of a rant. You see, in the era of the end of Classic and the hype for the new first expansion, the Burning Crusade, World of Warcraft was receiving a lot of attention. Way more than the WoW development team probably expected they would ever get, as it just continuously got bigger every month and wouldn't stop growing until Cataclysm when it hit its peak. And so during the early transition period, when they were having a huge wave of people hitting the forums, before they'd hired the appropriate amount of staff to deal with them, the people who were there before weren't really expecting to have to deal with a massive amount of trolls. And so it caused a couple of incidents with some of the CMs, and the CM Tessarek in particular wrote out the following in response to people calling him a douchebag in a way that circumvented the profanity filter, and he lashed out at that person. When some of the other people in the forums then started making fun of him for defending himself, this was his response. You can't help it. Posted impassionately, they say you don't care. Posted nothing, they say you ignore. Posting with passion, you incite trolls. Posting fluff, you say nonsense. Post with facts you have, they whittle down with rationale. There is no win. There is only slow degradation. Take note, it is the first and only time you'll see someone in my position make that position. You can be me when I'm gone. And then after this, he was called out for being unprofessional. And this was his response to those lines of messages. When you can understand how a group of belligerent and angry posters can drive away people from this game with an uncrafted and improvisational campaign of misery and spin doctoring, then perhaps you can understand the decisions I make. Until you face mobs of psychology, you will not see my side. Until you see some bright-eyed player coming into the forums wanting to know what they should spec as this class, and see them shat on and driven away by petty and selfish people who are simply leveraging for game buffs, you will not understand. You will not understand until you see it daily, for years. Until you understand that many people will trot over you to get where they're going, or to get what they want. Until you understand that so many people will agree, completely, 100% with a loud, vulgar, and assertive individual, not because he is right, but because he is taking a stand against the man. To take no critical thought in what they say, but simply to hop on board. Until you actually try to acknowledge those who do not speak on the forums, for whatever reason they have, you will not understand. If you think an archaic business formula like the customer is always right works, you fail to understand customers, not a customer. It is a collective. No one person, even myself, is truly above the whole. I simply have the unfortunate quality of being easily singled out. Now, while nothing he said is quoted directly in the flavor text, it is pretty easy to see where the parallels come with people thinking this line of flavor text is in response to Tesseric. As it's really easy to associate the wickedness and soulless ones who devoured what they held most dear to just be a parallel to the trolls on the WoW forums. And the second line about how they destroyed his sanity and passion is also pretty similar to his post about passion. And seeing as the Burning Crusade launched shortly after Tesseric left the company, it could be easy to assume that this was put in game by a fellow game developer who agreed with the things he said in the WoW forums. It's doubtful that his CM had the power to put this in the game himself before leaving, which is what a lot of people theorize, and we also don't know if he was fired or left on his own terms. But it is a popular theory that this is in reference to Tesseric and his rant on the forums, and it's pretty easy to see the parallels after reading all of his dialogues, of which I only posted a small handful. And what's also pretty hilarious about this rant is how much it relates to World of Warcraft even in the modern day. If you heard someone say what he said today, it wouldn't seem out of place at all, which is kind of funny that even in the golden era of WoW, people were very angry about the game all the time, and the constant toxic posts in the WoW forums drove the CMs crazy. When the WoW developers were first planning out which classes players would be allowed to play, Druids were not on that original shortlist, but Blizzard did have 9 classes planned in the original list. Basically, warriors, paladins, shamans, priests, hunters, mages, and warlocks were all on the design table from the beginning. And in addition to those 7, they also had assassins and rune masters. Assassins eventually got converted into rogues, as they even have a spec called Assassination, and rune masters were never actually added to the game. Now, the idea behind rune masters was to have an unarmed fighter who had runes on their body which gave them magical properties, and they were kind of like an enchanter, but a whole class based around enchanting their bodies in order to do magic or physical feats. And they had even planned on having rune masters being one of the hero classes once they eventually decided to not include it in vanilla, and he would be alongside the Death Knights and Necromancers. And that also means they had planned on adding Necromancers to the game at some point, just as a hero class which was supposed to be better than normal classes. So they never actually went with Rune Masters, but they did like the ideas behind some of its flavor. So they kind of split it up into the Death Knight and Monk classes that were eventually added. Death Knights have a rune system to use their magic, similar to how they wanted Rune Masters to work, and Monks are an unarmed class, who do basically the other side of what Rune Masters were supposed to be. And then they eventually just added Druids because that's a fantasy staple, and there were already some pretty notable lore figures that are Druids, so it only made sense for them to add them. And funny enough, Druids were not the last class added into the game, or programmed in anyway. They just weren't on the original design table for classes. Hunters were actually the last class to be added, or programmed into the game, and even then, they only barely made it in. And their design philosophy with Druids was that they wanted them to shapeshift a whole bunch, so they gave Druids a whole bunch of abilities that could only be used in their various shapeshifting forms. And they'd intended for players to be constantly shapeshifting in battle in order to do their full rotations and stuff. But there was one little caveat to this that they had kind of overlooked. Shapeshifting cost way too much mana to do that. And the final talent point in their feral tree for a time was a talent that reduced the shapeshifting cost by 25%. Which did not alleviate this problem at all, I might add. Shapeshifting still cost a ton of mana, but Blizzard was happy if a class was good at least one role in a raid, and druids could function as a healer in raids, as they gave innervates to priests or other healers, so they considered them good to go, even if the design philosophy they were supposed to be doing in raids didn't actually work. You know, the whole shapeshift and a whole bunch of things. Eventually, later on in the game's history, they did a much better job of encouraging druids to shapeshift more in combat, but generally only in PvP, as PvP players would shift into bear form in order to tank damage or to use their stun ability, and then shift into travel form to run away or go behind pillars, and then go into human form to heal up. So if you want the true shape-shifting druid fantasy, you kind of have to play PvP for it, as in raids and dungeons you basically just stay in one form the whole time. For this video, I thought it would be fun to read through the manual that came with vanilla WoW, and compare some of the things it says with how the game works today. I'll be honest, a lot of the things are still mostly the same, but there were a few very noticeable differences. Like for one, the manual says that each faction only has 4 races. As of making this video, there are 9 available races to each faction, for a total of 18 playable races. Each faction individually now has more playable races than the combined amount of Horde and Alliance races from vanilla WoW. And there are still 4 more races planning on being added soon, with Blizzard promising even more down the road. The manual also says there's only 9 classes to choose from, and that Paladins are Alliance only, and Shamans are Horde only. Well, there's only 12 classes to choose from today, so only 3 more since vanilla WoW. The amount of new classes added since then isn't that drastic, like the amount of playable races. Also, Shamans and Pallies were made cross-faction the very next expansion in the Burning Crusade. Faction-exclusive classes didn't stay in the game very long. In a screenshot of the in-game user face, on the mini-map, it has an indication for the day/night clock. In current WoW, at night, it only gets slightly darker, while in vanilla, it was a much bigger deal, so that part of the mini-map doesn't exist anymore. Characters gain access to new spells and abilities whenever they gain levels. To learn these new abilities, you must speak to your class trainer. In current WoW, you learn all of your spells automatically, and the only classes that still need to visit the trainers are mages to learn new portals. If you ask the ghost healer to resurrect you, you will lose a significant portion of experience. This amount will never force you to lose a level. Now, this part of the manual surprised me. I didn't know they had planned on making you lose experience on death. This never made it into vanilla though, and was only in beta stages of WoW. You see, in other MMOs at the time, that was pretty standard. I've heard stories of people dying a few times in raids, and having to go back out and level up again, before being able to do more attempts due to the level loss. And one of the main appeals of WoW was its less punishing nature to deaths, and the fact that running around in the world didn't have load screens, which was like magic to people back then, making it seem like a real open world. Although, one of the next paragraphs in the manual says, it is almost always better to run to your corpse rather than ask a spirit healer to resurrect you. That's because all you lose when you run to your corpse is time, which means you were only supposed to lose experience when rezzing from a spirit healer. You'll notice over the course of this video that the manual will say a few things that never even made it into vanilla WoW, which means the manual was probably written with beta WoW as a reference. Certain character classes can cast spells to raise you from the dead. The Priest, Shaman, and Paladin all have resurrection spells. Notice how they do not list the Druid among the classes that can res. Druids did have a battle res in vanilla though, just not a regular res for some reason. They were eventually given a normal res pretty early on in the game's life cycle, but I'm not sure if it was in vanilla WoW. Also, a note on resurrection sickness. When you are resurrected by a spell or soul stone, you revive with a condition called resurrection sickness. Resurrection sickness did exist. It was just applied by player reses and not the spirit healers. Nowadays, player reses impose no such disadvantages, and resing at the spirit healer gives res sickness. Critters are non-combative animals, such as sheep, rabbits, cows, and prairie dogs. These animals will never fight you, even if you attack them. Killing a critter earns you no experience. Little did they know about pet battles, which would be added only 8 years later. Also, critters will attack you if you get into combat with them. They just don't do very much damage. This next part will be about various stats. Strength determines the physical power of your character. A high strength improves your attack power. Strength is also a determining factor in how much damage you block if you use a shield. Rogues and hunters only use a partial value of strength to determine their power. Now, strength still kind of works the same way, only I'm not sure if it still increases the amount you can block, but it no longer provides any benefit to rogues and hunters. It used to be, I think, that strength classes would get 2 attack power per point of strength, and other classes would just get 1 attack power per point of strength. So while it wasn't as useful, it was still not half bad if you had a piece of gear with strength on it as a rogue or hunter, which was probably the case quite frequently because vanilla pieces of gear were a mess when it came to which stats they had. Now onto agility. Agility improves your armor rating, your chance to dodge an attack, and your chance to score a critical hit with a melee or ranged attack, thus dealing increased damage. Rogues and hunters also use agility in combination with strength to determine their attack power. Old school agility was so nice. Current day agility just gives attack power, but it used to also give an increase to dodge, an increase to armor, and an increase to crit. It was good to the point where tanks didn't really mind it on a piece of gear, all the way up until late Wrath. Plus the vanilla version gave rogues and hunters 2 attack power per point, and other classes only 1. But then in the Burning Crusade it was changed only 1 attack power per point for all classes, because I guess Blizzard thought agility was too overpowered as is, for all the different stats it gave on top of attack power. But then it was changed back to 2 attack power for agility classes in Cataclysm, I think, and its other bonus effects weren't removed until Warlords of Draenor. So nowadays, agility only gives attack power and nothing else. Stamina affects your hit points, no matter what class you play. However, characters designed to absorb damage, such as warriors and paladins, gain more benefit from stamina than classes who have other capabilities, such as rogues and druids, who in turn gain more benefit from pure spellcasters, such as mages. This might be a little misleading, as stam was the same for all classes. It's just some classes could take talents that gave them more health and stuff like that. Intelligence improves your mana reserves. Intelligence has no bearing on non-spellcasting classes. Int used to increase your max mana all the way up until Mist of Pandaria, I believe. They also made it so that it gave you a little bit of spell crit later on. Despite what it says about not being usable for non-spellcasters, Int was a very highly valued stat by hunters for quite some time. I'm just not 100% sure if they liked it all that much in vanilla WoW though, but they did like it in TBC and Wrath. Also, Int used to increase, like, how fast you could gain weapon skills. So, it was kind of useful for melee classes, just not in any kind of raid or PvP setting, and more in a pure put on intellect pieces of gear when you go out and grind weapon skills. Spirit determines the regeneration rate for your health and mana. A high spirit results in much faster regeneration, while a low spirit gives you reduced regeneration. Spirit is no longer in the game, and pretty much functioned the same way as it says here until it was removed. Also, Blizzard was trying to push the angle that all classes needed spirit and not just healers, and that's why I think some pieces of warrior gear had spirit on it, because it did increase your health as well as mana, only out of combat. There wasn't really a way to give you that out-of-combat regeneration in combat, outside of a very infamous troll racial that everybody made fun of for being bad. All characters start at level 1 in the game, and can advance in level by learning experience. The level cap in the game is 60. Once you achieve level 60, you cannot gain any more levels. Keep in mind that as an online role-playing game, World of Warcraft is always being updated with extra content. While at its release, the game has a level cap of 60, this cap will increase in future as the game continues to evolve. As of reading this now, the level cap is expected to be raised to 2 times the level cap of Vanilla WoW. Just goes to show how long ago this was. Experience is the only means of advancing your character levels, and is gained in 2 primary ways. Most experience comes from defeating monsters and from completing quests. A third means of getting experience, exploring the world, gives you so little experience compared to the 2 primary methods that it can't really help you gain character levels. Nowadays, there are a few more ways to get XP outside of the 3 listed in the manual. You now also get experience from Battlegrounds, collecting materials from gathering professions, finding treasures, and from pet battles, in addition to killing monsters, exploring, and doing quests. Your class skills, which determine the effectiveness of your class spells and abilities, do not automatically improve when you level up. Instead, they improve as you use them. However, the skill cap you have in class skills does increase when you gain a level. For example, as a first level priest, your maximum skill level in holy magic is 5. As you cast holy spells, your holy skill will eventually max out at 5 points, until you advance to the next level and your holy magic skill cap increases. This was the old system of spell skills, which never made it into Vanilla WoW. But weapon skills did make it into the game and worked exactly how it's listed here. Except for, only using weapons instead of spells. The 4 slots at the bottom of your character window are for your handheld equipment. The first slot is for your primary hand, the second slot is for your offhand, the third slot is for your ranged weapon, and the 4th slot is for your ammunition. Nowadays, we only have 2 slots for weapons, not 4. It used to be you could have 2 melee weapons equipped, along with a ranged weapon at the same time. The ranged weapon was almost exclusively just a stat stick for all classes except hunters. So Blizzard just removed it and moved ranged weapons and wands to the main hand slot. Although I guess an argument could be made that many casters did use their wands also, except you only ever wanded something if you didn't want to use mana. So when Blizzard kind of fixed the whole casters never run out of magic thing, they didn't really need wands anymore. For this next part, the manual lists all the types of item quality in the game. Gray, white, green, blue, and purple. And then hints that there may be a more powerful type out there. Obviously hinting at legendary. But in addition to those types, including legendaries, we now have the artifact quality, heirloom quality, and a quality only used for the WoW token. The manual lists all the classes and a little bit of info about them. So for this first part, I'll basically just summarize a few things that stood out to me, and not be comparing every little thing. For warriors, it details the importance of the stances they used to have, and lists some of the weapons they can use as advanced, including the ability to wear plate armor, which I think was just kind of a leftover thing from copying D&D, because it never really meant anything in-game, other than needing to learn how to use those weapons from weapon trainers out in the world, rather than just starting out being able to use those weapons. For mages, it says, a fragile class with little health and poor fighting ability. However, they make up for this physical weakness with their awesome spellcasting. Mages can dish out the most ranged damage in the shortest time. I thought that was funny. Mages are supposed to be a fragile class, which isn't entirely wrong today either. Mages are still kind of squishy. It's just, they also have one of the best defensive cooldowns, in the form of Ice Block. Mages did have Ice Block back then as well. It's just raid mechanics have changed over time, where a class with a full immunity cooldown is more valuable than a DPS class that just takes mildly less damage baseline. Also, the point about them being able to do the most range damage in the shortest time might still be true today. I'm not exactly an expert on which classes have the most burst damage, but I do remember back in Dragon's Soul, when guilds were progressing on the spine of Deathwing, a fight which basically only required classes with the most burst possible. Half of the raids on all of the world first kills were comprised of mages for their burst damage. And from what I've read online, mages are still top tier when it comes to burst, but, not overwhelming like that. While the Shaman, Druid, and Paladin can also heal, none of them can heal as well as the Priest. Also, the Priest has better resurrection spells than the Paladin or Shaman. Can you imagine a game in which the manual said something like this in an MMO today? Nowadays, all the healers are pretty equal. Priests just have 2 healing specs instead of 1. Also, I'm not sure what it means about priests being better at rezzing. Maybe priests brought them back to life with more health or something? Which I guess is technically better, but still not a lot. For the rogue page, funny enough, a lot of the stuff is still kind of the same. Other than the fact that they also have a list of advanced weapons they can learn. Fun fact about Cheap Shot. Cheap Shot is one of the few abilities in the game that still works exactly the same as it did in Vanilla WoW. Their powerful buffs are among the best in the game, able to boost all attributes in addition to conferring strong armor and resistance bonuses. Their offensive spells, while good, are not meant as the druid's main strength. I love how the druid's selling point is their Mark of the Wild buff. Poor hybrid classes in vanilla, they just got the short end of the stick. Nowadays, they're properly balanced and no longer give that buff, which was their selling point. Although, it is planned to make a return in the next expansion. The Pally page basically just talks about their auras and seals they used to have, plus mentions a few times about how they excel at fighting undead, which apparently was a selling point in vanilla. Nowadays, they still kind of have auras and seals, just not in the way that they existed in vanilla WoW. And also, they no longer excel at fighting undead, but they do have some, flavor interactions with them in 1 or 2 abilities. The Shaman's unique power is totems. Totems are spiritual objects that a shaman must earn through questing. Once earned, a totem enables a shaman to cast totem spells associated with that totem's element. Totem spells can be purchased from a trader, although, in order to cast a totem spell, the appropriate elemental totem must be carried in the shaman's inventory. Totems are almost exclusively cooldowns now, but that was once what shamans were all about, and their selling point. You no longer need to go on crazy long quests to get your totem items to be able to use your totem abilities. Elemental shamans can still drop 4 totems at once with a talent, but those are mainly just there as a fluff way of giving you passive buffs, and don't function like old school buff totems that gave everyone a buff. A hunter's pet must be kept happy, or it will leave you and even turn on you. For those of you who don't know, hunter pets once had a happiness bar, and if it was too unhappy, it would run away from you. Also, pets just lost happiness over time, so if you AFK'd in a city long enough without feeding your pet, it could leave you. Once a character achieves 10th level, it will begin earning talent points at the rate of 1 per level. Talent points can then be spent at the talents window. Every class has 3 lines of talents, not including a character's racial talents list. Alright, let's stop there. Racial talents? Now that's a new one. As many of you probably know, there were no such things as racial talents in Vanilla WoW. And in fact, I had no idea what this could be referring to, as I don't think it showed up in the beta either. But then I remembered a video I made last year, in which another YouTuber helped me out with an alpha client patch, which included skill points. So I went back and watched my video, and what do you know? Those skill points were indeed called talent points, and even had a TP next to their little indication saying what you needed to spend on them. Now, how these worked was that you got talent points as you leveled up, a lot more than one, and could spend them on an incredibly large selection of talents, ranging from giving 2% increased chance to parry while wielding a two-handed axe, not two-handed weapons in general, literally just two-handed axes. Also another for 2% more crit with two-handed axes, 2% more attack power, and so on and so on. Same for all other weapons and spell schools, like a talent to increase your holy magic skill at the cost of reduced shadow resistances. There were a ton of talents like this, going over a wide range of incredibly specific things, and actually looked really neat, if not a tad bit cumbersome. Although these didn't make it into beta WoW, so this manual might have had this part written during an alpha WoW development stage. Now to continue on with the rest of this article from the game manual. Talent points can be spent to purchase talents, which can do a variety of things. Many talents can improve your class's existing abilities, give you new abilities, or improve your class skills. All classes have the same talent points, but no single character can hope to acquire every single talent. Thus, there are many talent choices open to your character, and your choices will help differentiate you from other players playing the same class. Talents are still technically in the game, but they work nothing like how they're listed here. Nowadays, you get a new talent once every 15 levels or so, and you just choose one of 3 abilities. Also, there it goes again talking about class skills, which never made it to live. In addition, there are race restrictions on weapon skills. Gnome warriors, for example, cannot use bows, while night elf warriors can't use guns. I did not know about this. Apparently, it was planned for some races to not be able to use certain weapons. I'm pretty sure that didn't make it into vanilla WoW though, and instead, races just got racial bonuses if you used a certain weapon, like trolls getting a bonus for using bows and dwarfs getting a bonus for using guns. To harvest an herb, simply right-click on it. If you have the necessary skill level, you'll almost always open a loot window containing the herbs you found. If you get a message telling you that you failed to harvest the herb, simply retry it. Apparently, you could fail when trying to herb or mine. That is not the case today. Every character can learn up to 2 trade skills. This enables a player to be self-sufficient and choose 1 gathering trade skill and 1 production trade skill. Alternatively, you could learn 2 gathering trade skills or 2 production trade skills. No character can learn more than 2 trade skills. However, secondary skills such as fishing and cooking do not follow under this restriction. Notice how it doesn't list first aid as a secondary skill. Also, later on in the manual, it lists first aid under the production trade skills, like blacksmithing and leatherworking, which hints that first aid was meant to be a primary profession for some time. Nowadays, first aid is a secondary profession, although it is planned on being removed in the next expansion. Hearthstone can only be used every 60 minutes, so after you use a Hearthstone, you must wait another hour before you can use it again. Nowadays, Hearthstones have a 30-minute cooldown, and can be lowered to 15 minutes through a guild perk. But for the longest time, it did have a 1-hour cooldown that couldn't be lowered. As with aerial mount travel, only Horde players may use the Horde Zeppelins, and only Alliance players may use the Alliance ships. I assume this means you couldn't sneak onto ships as Horde and use them at one point, because today, as long as you can sneak onto boats or Zeppelins, they work for both factions. It's just they're surrounded by hostile NPCs. Each race has its own unique type of mount, except for Tauren, who are too big to ride animals and must resort to their planes running racial ability. Yeah, that did not make it into vanilla WoW. Taurens were given Kodos to ride eventually. Now, all races can ride pretty much any mount, and there's just faction restrictions instead of racial ones. There are 3 auction houses in the world: a Horde auction house in Orgrimmar, an Alliance auction house in Ironforge, and a neutral auction house in the Goblin city of Gadgetzan. Auctioneers exist within these auction houses and allow you to buy or sell items without having to go through the trade channel. There are now auction houses in pretty much every major city, and even in your garrison. Plus, they're all connected now. That was not the case in Vanilla WoW. Honor points. As you kill opposing players and special PvP-enabled non-player characters, you will earn honor points. You also gain honor points for conquering contested battlegrounds and slaying important NPCs, such as leaders and generals of the opposing faction. At the end of each day, these honor points will be distributed to all players who participated in PvP gameplay, with players contributing the most kills for their side earning the most points. These honor points accumulate to give you a PvP rank, which can fluctuate based on your participation and success in PvP play. Honor points basically work this way in vanilla, and were later on changed into a currency you just got immediately after doing PvP stuff. And then today, it's just how you level up your honor talents. Dishonor points. Even among enemies as bitter as the Horde and Alliance, there is honor. If you flaunt this honor and engage in objectionable PvP play, such as killing new players vastly inferior to your level, or killing essential non-combat NPCs such as flight masters or quest givers, you will earn dishonor. If you accumulate enough dishonor through your criminal actions, you will be branded an outlaw. As a consequence, you'll suffer experience penalties, lose access to your own faction cities, and become so hated by even your own. Now, dishonor points did make it into the game, but they did not work nearly as drastic as it says in the manual. Dishonor basically just made it so you lost any honor you gained at the end of the week. It was like just negative honor points, and sometimes people would group up with people who they wanted to lose honor points, and go around and kill a bunch of vendors and quest NPCs to tank their rating. However, let's go over a little bit more about dishonor points in the manual too. Recovering dishonor. World of Warcraft is forgiving of transgressions, and if you refrain from dishonorable actions for a long enough time, you will eventually return to favor with your faction and cast off your criminal label. So, it seems like you would have been able to return to normal playing status eventually. And finally, at the end, there are maps of the old world. Lots of it are still the same, kind of. The Cataclysm did change a lot of things around, but I'm kind of comparing this to like Vanilla WoW's version. But on the Eastern Kingdom segment, you can clearly see the island of Kul Tiras, Tol Barad, and Zuldar. Tol Barad wasn't added to the game until Cataclysm. Kul Tiras won't be added until the next expansion, and Zuldar is still not in the game. Zuldar is an island the Horde used in the Second War to stage their invasion into Lordaeron, and shows up in the first mission in Warcraft 2, I think. So, all three islands have been in the game's lore for quite some time, but it's funny to see how close they are to everything on this map, and they are in such drastically different locations in-game. Number 10, the Dim Torch. This item was probably going to be part of the scrapped secondary profession called survival skills, which you needed to make the basic campfire and other survival skills. I mean, I say others, but it was literally just the campfire and torch. It is theorized that some zones in WoW were going to be a lot darker than normal and would need some kind of light to navigate. So the dim torch might have been used for that. The torch itself has a limited duration of only 1 hour, required the item Unlit Pour Torch to make, and gave everybody nearby a 4 spirit buff like the campfire does. Although on screen it should say 4 stamina, but it used to be 4 spirit. So it was like having a campfire you could walk around with, and kind of functioned like a real torch, as it could only be lit for a limited time. Now, the model for this torch did end up making it into the game as other items. It's just this crafted 1 hour duration buff-giving torch never did. At number 9, we've got the War Paint shirt. Not good for the ladies, NYI. This shirt was basically just tattoos on the chest of your character. I assume it was a test for how adding tattoos for players could work out by adding them to shirt items. Today, the only characters with tattoos are demon hunters, so it might have been testing for that even. Now, you may have noticed that the item also mentions not good for the ladies. And that's because if you use the item on a female character, the tattoos go over the bra. I guess what it was trying to say was that it wasn't designed with female models in mind yet, which makes sense when you look at the female model with a shirt on. I assume if they continued the idea, they'd eventually add a female option to these shirts too, like they did with the female demon hunters and their tattoos. At number 8, we've got Teagle's Trashbringer. Now, last time I mentioned this item in a video, people remarked on the weird way I pronounced Teagle. Apparently, it's Tiggle, as in Tiggle Bitties, because it's a play on words for big old titties. Yeah, I didn't know that. I can see why you guys found it funny I pronounced it that way. Anyways, this item was included in the alpha version of Wrath of the Lich King and given to new Death Knights. It did terrible damage and only vendored for 1 copper, so it's not like it was very useful. Although it did have the model of the Ashbringer, which wasn't in the game yet at the time, and was most likely just put in for fun. For those of you who don't know, the Ashbringer was one of the most sought after, never added to the game weapons for the longest time. People had all kinds of crazy theories in vanilla WoW about how to get one that involved fishing, doing AV, and ooze in the Plague Lands, and a few other things. During Legion, Blizzard played homage to all these rumors by requiring you to do things similar to the Ashbringer rumors from vanilla to get the hidden artifact appearance. But none of that really has anything to do with the Trashbringer. It's just a joke item that had its item quality upgraded to artifact quality in Legion for no reason. At number 7, we've got the unfinished Mammoth mount models. In Wrath of the Lich King, we got the Traveler's Tundra Mammoth, a brand new mount that not only allowed you to carry other party members on its side, but also had vendors that sold food and drinks, and repaired your gear. In Cataclysm, we got the Sandstone Drake, the only way to fly another person around that didn't require you to do recruiter friend shenanigans, and was great for helping out low-level players. In Mists of Pandaria, we got the Grand Expedition Yak, which, like the Traveler's Tundra Mammoth, had a repair vendor plus a reforger. So no longer did you have to go back to town after getting a new piece of gear, if you wanted to reforge it with the correct stats. You also had the first edition of the Water Strider, allowing all players to walk over water without needing a special skill to do so. And then in Warlords of Draenor, to top off the previous expansion's additions of brand new types of mounts, we got the Reforger and the Yak mount replaced with the Transmog guy. Also, we got another Water Strider. That is to say, nothing new was added. But there are these unfinished Mammoth mount models in the game files that were added in Warlords of Draenor, which probably might have been a new kind of mount. But just like everything else in this expansion, was most likely scrapped so that they could work on Legion. So many things planned for this expansion were scrapped. In fact, I have a video going over a few of the things that I'll link in a little card on screen, and at the end of this video if you want to check it out. Number 6, the Onyxia Scale Breastplate. This item was going to be a craftable item in Vanilla WoW that required the Scale of Onyxia as one of its crafting materials. Now, what makes this unique is that the Onyxia Scale was only ever used for crafting one item, the Onyxia Scale Cloak. A cloak that was almost required in order to progress through Blackwing Lair, so it was in high demand. So having other uses for this scale seemed like a no-brainer, and it's a wonder why Blizzard never added the breastplate. The breastplate didn't really do anything special like the cloak, which was used to prevent a one-shot mechanic, so maybe it was removed so that people wouldn't be tricked into crafting this subpar item with the scales that were needed for the cloaks instead. Who knows? It seems like it'd be a good idea to have more things to use a crafting reagent on than just one item, but I guess not. Number 5, the powerful smelling salts. Today, the only people who can res other players are classes with a healing spec and classes with a battle res. Also, engineers sometimes with jumper cables that don't always work. But in the game files are items called powerful smelling salts that were slated to be a first aid item with the effect of resing a dead player. If these salts did manage to make it into the game, every single player would have the ability to res other players, like we used to have when we still had the mass res guild perk. I still think smelling salts would be a cool thing to add to the game today, especially since they removed the mass res perk. I mean, they'd only work on one player, and you'd still have to craft them. so it wouldn't be anywhere near as bad as mass res. Number 4, the pet fish. This item would summon a dead pet fish. I think this item was supposed to be a play on why they couldn't have aquatic pets as companion pets, before they added the little bubble to pets in Pandaria that a lot of fish-like pets have today. The tooltip for the item says, which makes sense since it is a dead fish. I can probably understand why they never added it, and probably wouldn't today, with, the whole bubble system being a thing now. And at number 3, we've got the knowledge rogue items. Rogues in vanilla WoW had 2 extra class-specific professions to level up. Poisons to create the poisons for the weapons, and lockpicking, which had to be a level up like any other profession and required the rogue to go out into the world and open footlockers, like how a miner would go around the world and mine ore. You want to know how many other classes had a class-specific profession in vanilla? That's right, none of them. It was only rogues, which is probably why the knowledge items were never added. Knowledge items were recipes that required the rogue class to use. These recipes allowed the rogue to create disguises of various NPCs from vanilla WoW. Rogues in other fantasy games and lore are generally really good at disguises and sneaking into places by dressing up as other people. So these items fit the rogue fantasy perfectly. And each disguise required you to loot random things from the NPCs you wanted to transform into. In fact, some of these items required for these recipes did make it into the game and just straight up served no purpose, other than vendor trash, since the knowledge recipes were never added. Of course, some of the items, like the Red Defias mask, just ended up becoming popular vanity items as well. Now, as to why these recipes were never added to the game, well, probably because rogues already had 2 other class-specific professions at the time, which was 2 more than all other classes. So why add a 3rd? Of course, there could be a whole bunch of other reasons, but that's my best guess. At number 2, we've got the Frostmourne. For an item never added to the game, it sure has gone through a lot of changes. The sword has been in the game file since the launch of the game in vanilla WoW, and wasn't used by any characters in game until Wrath of the Lich King. The item and stats were shown off at BlizzCon one year, and also mentioned that it would never be available to players. When it was shown off at BlizzCon, it was shown to be of an artifact quality, and in-game files appeared like that as well, only with a few changes to its stats and meta socket being added, which was a gem type that used to only appear on helm items, so it was weird seeing one on a weapon. It was also later changed in the game files to appear as a poor quality weapon with no stats, terrible damage, but still has a meta socket on it, strangely enough. I've heard by people who managed to equip the item on private servers that the buff it gives, which reads as "The wielder of Frostmourne will become the new Lich King," just gives you a cosmetic buff that doesn't really do anything else. Now, seeing as the item was shattered by Tyrion at the end of Wrath, and Frost Death Knights craft the pieces that were left into their artifact weapon, I doubt this item will ever be added to the game. And at number 1, we've got Martin's Broken Staff. This item has the really useful effect of committing suicide, which instantly kills the player. I mean, I guess useful is subjective in this case, as I'd assume most people would call that anything but useful. It's also a poor quality weapon with no stats, and a super fast attack speed of half a second for some reason. I think this might be one of the fastest weapons in the game now that I'm looking at it. Anyways, this item used to be a GM item called Martin Thunder before patch 3.3, which had plus 100 resistance to 4 different schools of magic, and had a little more useful effect of killing all enemies within 30 yards. Now, the reason this never released item got such a drastic change is most likely because of the Martin Fury disaster, where a GM accidentally gave a player the shirt Martin Fury, which had a similar effect of allowing you to instantly kill enemies within 30 yards, which the player then used to kill a whole bunch of bosses in Old War with his guild. Considering Martin's Broken Staff got changed to its less than useful state around the same time this incident happened, is good enough support for this theory to me. In Blackwing Lair, there's an item that drops called Steeling's Impending Scarab. However, there is no named NPC called Steeling in the game. There is, however, other mentions to who Steeling might be though. In Gadget's End, there's an abandoned cart called Steeling's Cart. And during Hollow's End, you can buy a food item called Steeling's Sour Sucker Pop. The food item doesn't really give us much info to go on. However, the cart and location of it most likely points to Steeling being a goblin. And since there are a lot of goblins in BWL, it can be surmised that she either got kidnapped or recruited to work for Nefariat and left her cart behind. To further this theory, there is an NPC in the game files called Steeling's Silvercart, who does not have a model. But seeing as her last name is Silvercart, that could be a direct nod to her cart in Gadget Zone. So we can further guess Blizzard probably had plans for some kind of quest involving her, and her cart was most likely going to be involved in it. But whatever plans they had were obviously scrapped. Did you know that prior to patch 1.3, there were no caps to the amount of people that could enter any dungeon? You could, if you wanted to, bring a full raid of 40 people into Wailing Caverns, for example, and easily clear the place with just pure numbers. This is something that was changed pretty early on in Vanilla WoW, so a lot of people who experienced Vanilla WoW through Classic WoW never got to experience trivializing dungeon content in this way. However, during the patch, they didn't limit all dungeons to 5 players. In fact, only Dire Maw was limited to 5. All other dungeons were given a base cap of 10 people, and some other random variants like Blackrock Spire being a 15-man. They didn't really consolidate all dungeons down to 5 players until a little bit later on in WoW. In Vanilla WoW, there was the Dark Cleric Salem's Chest, an object in the open world in the Tirisfal Glades that could not be opened and was guarded by Scarlet Crusade members. There is a named NPC nearby called Lieutenant Sanders, but if you kill him, he doesn't drop any loot. There was in the game files a key called Key to Salem's Chest, which simply stated it opened said chest. However, this key was never actually added to the game, and the chest was quietly removed from the game in the Cataclysm revamp. Some players asked some game masters if the key would ever be added, since it seemed like there was obviously supposed to be a quest here, but there was nothing in Vanilla WoW that would send you to the Scarlet Crusade camp with a named NPC, and actually got a response, basically saying they advised people to stop looking for the key, and that maybe be used again in the future. In Cataclysm, they had an archaeology trash item called the Intricate Treasure Chest Key, which included a funny nod to the chest in its last sentence, simply saying that it did not open Salem's chest. The best speculation as to why this chest was in the game was because it was probably used for a class quest in beta that was removed at launch. In a random ruin house in Elwyn, there's an object called Stolen Chest. This object could never be opened in Classic, but it did have a description if you moused over it, indicating that it could be opened, but it was made no longer interactable in the Cataclysm revamp. So, what was in it? Well, according to some beta players, the chest was just part of a level 10 warrior quest, and its key was dropped by James Clark. This key is in the game files and even states in its description text that it opens the stolen chest. But with the removal of a lot of class quests in live, the quest that would allow you to obtain the key was also removed. But in the removal of the key and quest from the game, the devs forgot to also remove the stolen chest from the open world, so it confused many Alliance players for years.